You probably think you'd know if you were in an experiment, right? Someone in a lab coat, a clipboard, a room with one-way glass. But what if I told you the experiment was never in a lab? It was in your home, your phone, your job, your entire life. For years, you've been poked, watched, manipulated, without consent and without a clue. Not in secret labs, but in public, in daylight, with a smile. From the way you scroll to the way you vote. It's all been tested, tweaked, engineered, and by the end of this video, you'll realize something uncomfortable. You weren't just part of the study. You were the subject. Let's begin. Milgram Obedience Experiment. You ever stop to think how easily people give up control, not because they're forced, but because someone in authority tells them to? Nothing loud, no weapons, just a calm instruction. That's all it takes. And the wildest part is, if you were around back then, you might have gone along with it too. Back in the 1960s, there was this guy named Stanley Milgram, a psychologist. His question wasn't casual. It came straight out of the horrors of Nazi Germany. He wanted to understand how millions of ordinary people could follow orders that led to mass murder. Were they brainwashed, evil, or was it something way more uncomfortable, something disturbingly human? So Milgram sets up this experiment. It looks innocent enough on the surface. Two people show up to a lab. One becomes the teacher. The other is the learner. The teacher's job is to test memory by reading out word pairs. Every time the learner gets one wrong, the teacher is supposed to press a button and deliver an electric shock. And with every mistake, the voltage goes up. There's a shock generator right in front of them. The switches are clearly labeled 15 volts, 30 volts, 60, all the way up to 450. At first it says slight shock, then moderate, then danger. Eventually, the labels just turn into a red warning. Now here's the twist. The learner, he's not really getting shocked. He's an actor. The whole setup is fake. But the teacher doesn't know that. He thinks it's real. He thinks every time he presses that switch, someone in the other room is feeling it. At 75 volts, the learner starts grunting. At 120, he's saying it hurts. By 150, he's yelling to be let out. 270 volts, he's screaming in agony. Then suddenly, silence. Nothing. No responses at all. You're the teacher. You've already pushed the button 6, 7, 8 times. You hear pain. You hear fear. Then nothing. The man in the lab coat tells you to keep going. Calm voice. No threats. Just a soft reminder. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. What do? Here's the gut punch. Most people didn't stop. They kept pressing the buttons, all the way to the maximum voltage, 450 volts, even after the screams turned into silence, even when it sounded like the person on the other end had passed out. 65% of participants went all the way. These weren't violent people. They weren't unstable. They were everyday men and women, teachers, salesmen, clerks, people who thought they were just part of a harmless study. And yet, under the pressure of polite authority, they kept hurting someone they thought was begging for them to stop. It's one thing to read that. It's another to realize you might have done the exact same thing. What makes this so disturbing isn't just the result. It's how easy it was to get there. No threats, no yelling, just a lab coat, a clipboard, a voice of authority. That was enough to override the gut instinct that says this is wrong. People were visibly distressed. They were sweating, shaking, biting their lips. One man laughed nervously through the entire session, but they didn't stop. because someone told them they had to keep going. That's the part that sticks in your brain like a splinter. It's not about being cruel. It's about being obedient, about how we're conditioned from childhood to listen to people we see as authority figures, teachers, bosses, doctors, cops, scientists. When they tell us to act, we listen, even if something deep down feels off. And it didn't end in the 60s. Versions of this experiment have been run again and again, in different countries, with different people, in different eras. The outcome barely changes. People obey, even when it goes against everything they believe about themselves. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a trick for a specific time or place. It's a mirror for how human beings are wired. That sense of not wanting to disappoint. That fear of conflict. That subtle voice that says, maybe they know better than I do. It's why someone will stand by silently while their coworker gets treated unfairly. It's why people follow terrible instructions without asking questions. It's why someone might click a button or sign a form or approve a decision they know is wrong, just because they were told it was part of the process. This is what makes the Milgram experiment more than a creepy story from the past. It's not some weird footnote in psychology. It's a flashing red warning light about how fragile our morals can be when pressure comes from the top down. Because it doesn't take a dictator or a mad scientist to make people obey. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet voice in a clean white coat. And the most unsettling part, you probably already have, not in a lab, not with a shock box, but in real life, at work, at school, online, following instructions without thinking, saying yes when your gut says no, staying silent because someone else seems to know what they're doing. You don't need wires and buttons to be part of a social experiment. You just need to stop asking why. And once you do, the experiment has already begun. Stanford prison experiment. Imagine walking into a basement and in less than 24 hours, completely forgetting who you are. You start acting like someone else, dressing like someone else, treating people like they're not even human. And no one forced you. You just changed. This happened. Not in a cult, not in a foreign country. It happened on the campus of Stanford University, in a study that was supposed to last 2 weeks, but had to be shut down after only 6 days. Because what happened inside that basement turned into something dark, something twisted, something that still messes with psychologists today. It started simple. Volunteers were told they'd take part in a study about prison life. They were screened. Normal guys, college-aged, smart, stable. They were split into 2 groups at random, prisoners and guards. No one was told to act a certain way. No one was given a script. It was just, go with the role. Guards got uniforms, sunglasses, batons. Prisoners were stripped, searched, and given smocks to wear. No names, just numbers. The mock prison was built in the psychology department basement. Locked doors, cells, tiny windows, real enough to feel it. And then something flipped. On the first day, everything was fine, awkward, maybe a little silly. Everyone kind of easing into the game. But by the second day, the guards started getting creative. They imposed rules, random punishments, push-ups, sleep interruptions, confiscating beds. The prisoners tried to push back. They were met with more rules, more control, more humiliation. Guards began insulting them, isolating them, forcing them to do things just to break their spirit. One prisoner had a breakdown by day 3, full panic, crying, shaking. He had to be removed from the study. But the others stayed. The guards didn't just follow instructions. They embraced the power. They started working extra hours, not for money, but because they wanted to. They got more aggressive, more controlling. Some prisoners stopped eating, others went numb. And the researchers, they let it happen. They watched, took notes. Even the lead scientist, Philip Zimbardo, got caught in the role. He was the prison superintendent, and he started thinking more like a warden than a psychologist. He ignored warning signs, dismissed concerns, until another outsider stepped in and told him, "This has gone too far." They ended the whole thing on day 6. 6 days. That's all it took to turn a hallway into a prison, to turn students into guards and inmates, to make people forget this was supposed to be an experiment. No one told the guards to be cruel. No one forced the prisoners to obey. But the roles, the situation, the environment did the heavy lifting. That's what makes this study so disturbing. It wasn't about bad people. It was about good people in a bad system. Normal, everyday guys became abusive when they felt they had authority, and others became submissive when they felt powerless. You might think, I would never do that. But here's the thing, these weren't trained actors. These weren't outliers. These were people just like you, and that's what the experiment revealed. It wasn't a freak result. It was a reflection, because when you put people in a situation where their identity is stripped, and you tell them they have power or none at all, they start believing it. And once you believe you're just a role, everything else gets blurry. This is called de-individuation. It's what happens when personal responsibility disappears. When you become just part of a group, a label, a mask. And when that happens, empathy takes a back seat. You stop seeing others as people, and you stop seeing yourself as accountable. It's not a theory. We've seen this over and over in real life. Prisons, military abuse scandals, hazing in fraternities, online mobs, even customer service jobs, where the uniform becomes a shield and people talk to each other like robots. The moment we stop seeing each other as individuals, the rules change. Zimbardo didn't create monsters. He uncovered how fragile the human sense of morality is when structure and identity are tampered with. How quickly we adapt to our environment, how dangerously we play roles, especially when those roles give us power. And what really stings? It doesn't take long. There were no physical threats, no real-world consequences. It wasn't even a real prison. But still, the behavior spiraled, fast, because it didn't need to be real. The mind made it real enough. And that's the trap. If someone told you tomorrow, you're the authority now, you make the rules, no oversight, no consequences, would you stay fair? Would you stay kind? Would you even recognize the moment when you crossed the line? Most people don't. They don't wake up thinking today I'll become cruel. It starts with small decisions. A little detachment, a little dehumanization. And soon you're not yourself anymore. You're the role, the title, the uniform, the rules. That's what the Stanford prison experiment proved. Not that people are evil, but that people are malleable, shockingly easy to shape. And once you're shaped by the wrong system, the scariest part is you don't even notice it happening. Not until someone makes you stop. Not until it's too late. Facebook's emotional contagion study. You ever open your phone, scroll for 5 minutes, and suddenly feel off? Maybe a little more irritated. Or weirdly down. Like the day just got heavier for no obvious reason. Now what if I told you that might not be random? It might be something you were part of without ever realizing it. In 2012, Facebook ran a study, not a survey, not a quiz, A real-time psychological experiment on nearly 700,000 users. No warning, no opt-in, no label that said this is for research. Just silent manipulation, right there in your feed. Here's what they did. Their data scientists wanted to see if emotions could spread through social media like a virus. Without words, without face-to-face contact, just through what people saw on their screens. They called it emotional contagion. So, for 1 week, they tweaked the news feed algorithm. Some users started seeing more negative posts, sad stories, complaints, frustration. Others saw more positive stuff, happy updates, celebrations, feel-good content. Then Facebook tracked how those users started posting themselves. And the results? Chilling. The people who were shown more negative posts started writing more negative things. The people who saw more positive content shifted in the other direction. Not dramatically, but measurably, statistically, predictably, which means your emotions can be engineered, not just influenced, designed. Think about that. A few invisible tweaks in the code, and suddenly your mood, your real-world feelings, start bending. You think it's just your day, or your thoughts, or your coffee not hitting right. But underneath it, someone flipped a switch, and you never even knew. This wasn't just a peek behind the curtain. This was a full-on reveal of how platforms can reach past your thoughts and mess with your emotional state. And here's the part that messes with people most. It was legal. Facebook's terms of service allowed for data analysis. Most users had already agreed to that. But nobody thought it meant being turned into a lab rat. There was no warning, no ethical review that users were made aware of, no way to say no. It just happened. While you scrolled, while you smiled, while you shared a meme or liked a baby photo, the defense from Facebook was clinical. They said the emotional impact was minimal, that it helped them improve user experience, that it was all just data. But that's exactly what made it so disturbing, because you don't need a massive shift to change behavior. You just need a nudge, a tilt, a slight adjustment in the emotional climate. And over time, that builds, one post at a time, one reaction at a time, until the platform is not just reflecting your mood, it's shaping it. And you never saw it coming. The core idea here, emotional contagion, is real. It happens in real life all the time. Someone yawns, you yawn. Someone laughs, it spreads. Someone walks into a room angry, the whole room feels it. Humans are emotional mirrors. We take on what we're exposed to. But online, it's different. Because what you're exposed to is not random. It's chosen for you. Curated, filtered, ranked. The machine decides what you see. And if that machine learns that keeping you slightly upset keeps you more engaged, it will show you more of that. Not because it hates you, but because it's working. That's the real danger. Not a villain in a tower. Not some evil genius twisting a dial. Just a machine doing what it was told to do. Maximize time, maximize clicks, maximize output. And if your sadness gets more interaction than your joy, the machine adjusts. We like to think we have control, that our moods belong to us. But the truth is, your mental state is more connected to your feed than most people want to admit. And if it can be nudged this easily, what else can be nudged? Your opinion on a protest, your reaction to a tragedy, your sense of what's normal, what's urgent, what's real. Emotional data is behavioral gold, and Facebook showed that it could be mined, modeled, and nudged without ever saying a word. Some people say, well, it was just a study. Nothing exploded, no one got hurt. But that's the point. It didn't feel like an experiment. It felt like a regular Tuesday. And that's what makes it so effective, because the most powerful experiments don't feel like experiments. They feel like life. So next time you feel off for no reason, stop and look at your feed. Not just what you're seeing, but what's missing. What's not being shown? What's being repeated? What emotional tone is subtly being echoed back to you? And ask yourself who benefits from the way you feel right now. Because once your emotions can be steered, silently, invisibly, your choices can too. And you might think you're just scrolling, but someone else might be pulling the strings. TikTok's For You page as a behavior conditioning tool. It starts so simple. You open the app, one video pops up, then another, and another. Before you know it, it's been 30 minutes. You barely blinked. You forgot what you were even there to do. But somehow, it feels like the app knows you better than most people do. That's not an accident. TikTok's For You page isn't just entertainment. It's not just a recommendation algorithm. It's one of the most advanced behavior conditioning tools ever made. And the wild part is you trained it, without realizing you were training yourself too. The first time you scroll on TikTok, the algorithm knows nothing about you. Zero. You're a blank slate. But it doesn't take long. The moment you pause, rewatch, like, skip, swipe away too fast, it learns, it watches, it adjusts. Every movement, no matter how small, is data, not just what you say you like, what your behavior says you like. It starts with simple patterns. You slow down for funny videos. You replay the ones with dogs. You skip anything that looks like an ad. So what happens? You start getting more of the stuff you paused for, less of what you ignored. And then it goes deeper. Maybe you linger on someone ranting about a bad relationship. Maybe you stop at a sad video without knowing why. Maybe you watch someone talk about anxiety or burnout. The app doesn't ask you why you watched. It doesn't need to. It just knows you did. And now it wants to give you more. But here's the trap. This isn't just about showing you content you enjoy. It's about shaping what you crave. Reinforcing emotional loops. The algorithm isn't just learning from you. It's teaching you, training your brain to respond a certain way. Like a slot machine that knows exactly when to flash the lights. You get a hit of dopamine when a video feels relatable. When someone says the thing you've been thinking but never voiced. When you laugh out loud alone in your room. And then the next video hits. And then the next. Each one slightly adjusted based on your last move. That's not just personalization. That's operant conditioning. It's the same method used to train animals. Reward certain behaviors. Reinforce them until they become habits. But instead of a treat, you get attention, validation, stimulation. And it doesn't matter how tired you are or how much time you waste. Your brain keeps chasing the next hit. And just like that, TikTok doesn't need to keep you interested in everything. It just needs to keep you engaged in something. So what does that look like in real life? It looks like people falling into niche rabbit holes, diet culture, conspiracy theories, hyper-specific beauty standards, hustle culture, ADHD self-diagnosis, you name it, TikTok can feed it. And once it sees that you respond emotionally, it digs in, fast. Some users have described their feed shifting dramatically over just a few days, from light-hearted content to darker, more obsessive loops. Not because they searched for it. Not because they asked, but because the app responded to their reactions. You're not browsing, you're being conditioned. And it happens without you feeling manipulated. That's the genius of it. There's no pressure, no push, just endless scroll. The perfect tool for invisible influence. Because here's what conditioning really means. Repeated exposure, tied to an emotional reward. And over time, that rewires your habits, your attention span, your preferences, even your worldview. You stop asking if a video is true. You start asking if it feels right, if it fits the emotional tone you've been fed for days. TikTok doesn't show you the world. It shows you a mirror, curated, polished, filtered to match your digital reflexes. And once your feed becomes your environment, your thoughts start to echo it. The most unsettling part. There's no end. Unlike other platforms, TikTok doesn't ask you what you want to see next. It decides. You scroll, it learns. You scroll, it adapts. There's no natural stopping point, no chapters, just one infinite chain of reinforcement. And while that sounds harmless, it's not. Because when your feed trains your brain to chase novelty, your tolerance for real life starts to shift. Normal moments feel dull. Silence feels uncomfortable. Conversations feel slow. And suddenly, your ability to just be present starts to erode. This is not about being weak or addicted. It's about being human. We're wired to respond to patterns, to rewards, to rhythm. TikTok doesn't exploit that in an obvious way. It does it subtly, elegantly, in a way that feels fun, until it feels necessary. You think you're just watching, but you're also being watched, modeled, modified, and the scariest part, there's no moment where you feel it happen. No line that gets crossed. You just realize one day you reach for the app without thinking. You scroll before you breathe. You laugh. You cry. You consume. And you come back tomorrow. Because the machine knows what you'll want even before you do. YouTube's autoplay funnel. YouTube does not care what you wanted to watch. It cares about what will keep you watching. You think you click a video, and that's the end of the story, but that click is just the beginning. Because the moment that video ends, the machine takes over. Autoplay kicks in, and it has one job. Not to show you something you might like, but to show you something you cannot look away from. That is how the funnel works. One video at a time. Each one nudging you a little further, a little deeper, until what you are watching no longer feels like a choice. It feels like gravity. Most people think of YouTube as a library. You search, you find. You learn. But the real engine underneath it all is not built for discovery. It is built for retention. The longer you stay, the more money YouTube makes. And autoplay is the hidden mechanism driving that. Because once the next video starts automatically, you are in it. You are part of the loop. And the loop is not random. It is highly calculated. Every second you hesitate, every title you consider, every time you hover over a thumbnail or rewind a few seconds, it all feeds the machine. The algorithm learns fast, and it learns deep. It starts to know not just what you watch, but what keeps your eyes open, what makes you feel, what keeps you hooked. Let's say you start off with something harmless, a video on productivity, tips for managing your day. The next video might be a motivational speech, then a clip about grinding harder, then a video about how lazy people fail, then a rant about how the world is against you. Without realizing it, you go from helpful advice to high stress, high emotion, borderline toxic content. You didn't ask for that escalation, but you didn't click away either. And that is the algorithm's green light to keep going. What makes this funnel so powerful is that it operates in the background. It never asks for permission. It never flashes a warning. It just plays. And with each video, your sense of reality bends a little. What you see starts to feel like what the world is. what people believe, what is normal. Because if video after video shows you the same type of ideas, the same kind of tone, the same emotional flavor, it becomes easy to believe that this must be how everyone thinks. But it is not the world. It is a mirror built from your reactions. There is a reason this feels familiar. This system works on the same basic principle used in behavioral conditioning. Tiny rewards. Variable feedback. Just enough tension to keep you anticipating what is next. Every video is a slot machine pull. Maybe it hits. Maybe it does not. But your brain stays in the cycle, hoping for something that hits harder, something that feels more true, more urgent. And the algorithm keeps adjusting, searching for that next trigger that will hold you longer. It does not care about your beliefs. It cares about your behavior. If outrage makes you stay, it gives you outrage. If fear holds your attention, it serves you fear. If conspiracy makes you curious, it will show you just enough to keep you interested. Not to convert you, just to keep you in the room. Because once you are in the funnel, the goal is not to inform you. It is to stretch the session as far as it can go. One video. Then one more. Then just one more after that. And here is the part that most people miss. You are not being manipulated with lies. You are being manipulated with your own curiosity. Your own attention is used against you. You are not dragged anywhere. You are nudged, slowly, logically, emotionally, until you wake up 2 hours later wondering how you went from one cooking video to a rant about global collapse. And it does not just happen to one type of viewer. It happens to everyone. Teens, adults, people looking for help, people looking for entertainment. Anyone who stays long enough becomes part of a behavioral loop. And over time, that loop shapes your thinking, your assumptions, even your mood. YouTube does not just respond to who you are, it helps shape who you become. That is why it is called a funnel, not a maze, not a jungle. A funnel has direction. It narrows over time. Your content gets more specific. Your emotions get more intense. The options get more similar. Until the algorithm has tuned your experience to a razor-thin version of reality. One that gets clicks. One that gets time. One that makes money. Now ask yourself, how often do you close YouTube because you are done? Versus how often do you just stop because you got tired, or distracted, or because something in the real world pulled you away? The algorithm does not give you an end. There is no moment where it says, hey, that was enough. It just keeps going until something else interrupts it. That is not entertainment. That is engineering, and it works. Because it does not feel like control. It feels like interest. It feels like discovery. But you are not exploring. You are being delivered, video by video, deeper and deeper, until one day you realize you don't remember choosing any of it. But you watched all of it. And that was the point. Project MKUltra. You ever wonder how far a government would go to control a mind? Not just influence. Not just persuade. Full on, break it down and build it back up. Mind control. Sounds like a movie, right? Sci-fi territory. But it happened, and not in some hidden corner of history. It happened in broad daylight, with paperwork, budgets, government stamps, under a project that sounds harmless on the surface. MKUltra. Just that name alone has this weird, cold ring to it. Almost like it was made to sound boring on purpose. But what it really was terrifying. MKUltra was the CIA's secret program to study mind control. Real, actual, weaponized psychological manipulation. It started in the early 1950s and ran for decades. Quiet, funded, hidden in plain sight. The official explanation, research into interrogation techniques, national security, the usual vague excuses. But behind closed doors it was chaos. They were dosing people with LSD without telling them, giving them psychedelic drugs and observing what happened, not in some lab with consent forms and doctors on standby, but in real-world situations, like slipping acid into someone's drink and watching from the next room. No warning, no explanation, just a human experiment. And some of these people had no idea what was happening. Civilians, mental health patients, prisoners, even soldiers. Some were told it was for stress tests, some were lied to completely. Some were just used, like lab rats. People had psychotic breaks. Some never recovered. At least one person died, jumped out of a window after a secret dosing. The CIA called it a suicide, then locked away the details. The most disturbing part is how systematic it all was. This wasn't one rogue scientist. It wasn't a mistake. It was an organized program, with funding, with strategy, with a goal to figure out how to break the human mind and rebuild it however they wanted. They tried sensory deprivation, isolation tanks, sleep deprivation for days, electroshock therapy turned up to the max, and all of it paired with drugs meant to destabilize the brain. They wanted to know, what happens when you erase memory? When you wipe identity? Can you reprogram a person to think differently, believe something new, follow orders without question? They were searching for a switch, something they could flip inside a person to create obedience, loyalty, or confusion so complete that the person no longer knew what was real and what was implanted. And while this sounds like a horror story, remember, this was not science fiction. This was a documented operation run by the intelligence community of the United States. And for years, they got away with it, because the people being experimented on were the ones least likely to fight back. People already struggling, already on the margins. The kind of people no one believed if they tried to tell the truth. The documents we have today, they're only partial. Most of the original MKUltra records were destroyed in the 1970s when the heat started closing in. The CIA's director at the time ordered the files shredded. So we only know what survived. Think about that. The stuff we know is horrifying, and it's just the leftovers. One program under MKUltra was literally called Subproject 68. It took place in Canada, run by a psychiatrist who believed he could wipe someone's mind and rebuild it from scratch. He called it depatterning. It involved putting patients into drug-induced comas for weeks, playing loops of recorded messages into their ears. Electroshock therapy that wiped entire parts of their personality. And these were not criminals or enemies of the state. These were people who came in for anxiety, depression, minor issues, and they left empty, like their minds had been scrubbed with steel wool. When the truth started coming out, the public reaction was disbelief. People thought it had to be fake, a conspiracy, until the government had to admit it, testify, investigate itself. But no one was really held accountable. No real justice. Just a quiet, slow fade from memory. And here is where it gets even more uncomfortable. MKUltra ended officially in the 70s. But the question is, did the mindset ever really stop? Did the belief that the human mind is just another tool to be tweaked and tuned ever go away? Or did it just evolve, get rebranded, moved into more subtle technologies? Because if the government was willing to do this back then, before social media, before mass data, before the internet, what do you think they would be capable of now? MKUltra is not just a story about the past. It is a warning, a reminder of how easy it is to justify cruelty in the name of progress. How fragile a human mind can be when someone decides it belongs to the state, and how deep the need for control runs when power is involved. It is not about paranoia. It is about pattern recognition. When you see systems set up to manipulate thoughts, behavior, identity, whether through drugs or media or algorithms, you have to ask yourself, are we still being studied? Still being shaped? And if we are, would we even know? Instagram's hidden like count experiment. You probably remember when Instagram started hiding likes. One day they were there, loud and bold under every post, and the next day gone. No announcement, no pop-up asking how you felt about it. Just a quiet update. And suddenly, you could still see how many people liked your posts, but you couldn't see anyone else's. What most people did not realize is that this was not a design change. It was an experiment, a psychological experiment run not in a lab, but on millions of people scrolling every day. And that experiment had one simple question behind it. What happens when you take away public validation? Because likes were never just digital high fives. They were currency, social proof, a way to measure attention and worth. Whether people admitted it or not, those numbers shaped behavior, made users think twice about what to post, how to pose, when to share. Likes had weight, and Instagram knew it. So when they started removing them from view, it was not about minimalism. It was about control. Instagram wanted to see how users would react when one of the most addictive feedback loops on the platform was interrupted. Would people post more freely? Would anxiety go down? Would influencers lose power? Or would users start chasing validation in new, less visible ways? And here's where it gets interesting. This was not just a global A/B test. This was behavioral conditioning at scale. Instagram turned off public like counts for some users in certain countries and left them on for others. Meaning, two people could be using the exact same app at the same time and be living in completely different psychological environments. And nobody knew which side they were on or why. Now think about that. Imagine waking up one day and your sense of social standing just disappears. No like count to compare. No way to measure what is doing well or not. On the surface, this sounds like a good thing. Less pressure, right? Less competition. Less obsession. But here is what really happened. People started compensating in subtle, often more damaging ways. If they could not rely on public likes to prove something, they leaned harder into comments, into DMs, into story replies. They asked people to engage, asked friends to hype them up. The need for feedback didn't go away. It just went underground. Instagram framed this as a mental health initiative, said they wanted to reduce anxiety and comparison. But ask yourself this. If they were truly trying to help mental health, why run it like a secret experiment? Why remove a major feature for some users but not others? Why test it silently without informed consent? Because it was not just about helping users. It was also about observing them, studying behavior, measuring shifts in content volume, post timing, interaction rates, seeing what happens to engagement when the scoreboard is hidden, and more importantly, figuring out how dependent people had become on a tiny heart icon. The results were messy. Some users felt free without the like count. Others felt invisible. For influencers, it was chaos. Brands could not easily assess performance. Smaller creators lost negotiating power, and that shift in control. That was the point. Instagram wanted to rebalance the ecosystem, reclaim some of the power that had leaked out to creators who had learned to game the system. So in the end, what did Instagram do? They made it optional. They gave users the ability to turn likes on or off for their own posts, which sounds empowering, but is actually brilliant manipulation, because now the platform can track an entirely new data set: who chooses visibility and who hides it, who wants to be seen and who wants to disappear. And here is the most twisted part. Instagram learned more from this experiment than they ever admitted publicly. Not just about mental health, but about the psychology of visibility, about how to shape user behavior without making it feel forced, about how to tweak feedback loops just enough to create a new normal without starting a riot. Because this is what platforms do. They run experiments in real time, on real people, without telling them. They shift tiny parts of the interface, measure response, push and pull attention like a lever. They do not need your permission to study you. You agreed to it the moment you signed up. What the hidden like count experiment revealed is something bigger than just a design preference. It showed that social validation is not a feature. It is a psychological trigger. And when platforms control that trigger, they control the way we behave, the way we think, even the way we feel about ourselves. It also taught platforms something critical: that they can change the rules of the game and users will adapt. That they can reshape digital culture not by force, but by subtle subtraction. Remove one visible number and people will chase the invisible ones. Remove the leaderboard and people will still find ways to compete. So next time an app makes a change and tells you it is for your mental health, ask what they are learning from it. Ask what behavior they are tracking, because the real experiment might not be the feature itself. The real experiment might be you. Operation Midnight Climax. Imagine walking into what you think is a motel room, maybe on a night out, maybe after a few drinks, maybe with someone you just met. The lights are low, the vibe is casual, nothing seems off. But what you do not know is this: hidden behind that mirror on the wall is a CIA operative. Not taking notes, not asking questions, just watching, recording, waiting to see what happens next after you've been unknowingly drugged with LSD. This was not a scene from a thriller. It was real. It was American. And it was part of a program with the most absurd, almost cartoonish name: Operation Midnight Climax. Sounds like a bad spy novel. But what the CIA did under that name is one of the most disturbing, least talked about chapters in American intelligence history. It was part of MKUltra, the broader mind control program. But this specific project took it to a level that even other agents found unthinkable. Here is what they did. They set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York. These looked like normal apartments from the outside. Inside, they were surveillance dens. Mirrors with cameras behind them. Microphones planted everywhere. The rooms were rigged to capture every moment, every sound, every twitch of paranoia or pleasure or confusion. The CIA then hired prostitutes to lure men into these safe houses. They were told to act natural, get the men comfortable, and then, without warning or consent, slip LSD into their drinks. The agents watching on the other side of the mirror. They wanted to see what the drugs would do, how the men would behave, what truths they would spill under the influence, whether the combination of sex, secrecy, and psychedelics could break down resistance and make someone totally vulnerable. There was no scientific control, no ethics, no accountability. These were not willing test subjects. These were random people plucked from bars and streets and used like tools. People who had no idea they were being dosed, let alone watched. Some of them probably never figured it out. They just woke up the next morning feeling off, thinking maybe they drank too much, never knowing their night had been orchestrated by the U.S. government. One agent in particular, George Hunter White ran much of this operation. During the day, he was a narcotics officer. At night, he was slipping acid to strangers and watching them through two-way glass. He once wrote, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun." That was the attitude. Not science, not duty, just fun. Think about that. A government program, funded by taxpayer money, dedicated to secretly drugging citizens for amusement and data collection. No oversight, no consent, and no justice for the people involved, because it was all buried, locked in classified files, dismissed as Cold War paranoia or retroactive embarrassment. This was not about stopping enemies. This was not even about gathering intelligence. Operation Midnight Climax was about seeing what happened when the rules disappeared. It was a playground for people who believed they were above morality because they were wearing a badge and had government funding behind them. It went on for years. Adjustments were made. Equipment got better. Dosages were tweaked. And through it all, the question was always the same: can we control a person by breaking down their sense of self? Can we make someone do something they would never do under normal conditions? Can drugs, sex, and manipulation replace traditional interrogation? And here's the worst part. We still do not know everything. Most of the documents were destroyed when MKUltra was shut down. What we have are fragments, declassified files, testimony from whistleblowers, bits of truth that slipped through the cracks. What we do know is already horrifying. What we do not know might be even worse. This experiment wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system doing what it was designed to do when no one is watching. Testing boundaries. Seeing how far it can push without getting caught. And in this case, it pushed right past morality and into something that feels more like a dystopian fever dream than historical reality. But it happened. And what does that say about power? About trust? About how institutions behave when they believe secrecy gives them permission? Operation Midnight Climax is not just a wild story from the Cold War. It is a case study in what happens when ethics are seen as optional. When regular people become test subjects in games they never agreed to play. And when those in charge no longer see the public as citizens to protect, but variables to manipulate. So next time someone tells you that things like this are conspiracy theories or exaggerations, remind them that the CIA literally spiked strangers' drinks in rented apartments and watched from behind the glass to see what they would do. That is not fiction. That is fact. And the only reason we know about it at all is because some of the evidence survived the shredder. It makes you wonder. If this is what we found out about, what did we never see? The Bystander Effect. There is this moment we have all had. You see someone trip on the sidewalk, or a car crash, or maybe just a loud argument getting too heated, and you freeze, not because you do not care, but because you are waiting, looking around, hoping someone else is already on it, someone more qualified, more certain, someone who just knows what to do. And when no one moves, neither do you. That quiet hesitation, that's the bystander effect. It is one of the most chilling things about human behavior, because it shows us something we do not want to admit, that when we are in a crowd, surrounded by others, our sense of responsibility starts to dissolve. Not on purpose, not because we are bad people, but because of this weird psychological reflex that tells us someone else will handle it. The most famous case tied to this is the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Back in the 60s, a woman was attacked outside her apartment late at night, stabbed, screamed for help, and according to the original reports, dozens of neighbors heard it. Lights flicked on, curtains moved, but no one called the police. No one came outside. She died alone, while people watched from their windows. Now that story has been debated and dissected for decades. Some of the details were exaggerated by the media, but the core idea hit people hard because it exposed something that felt true, even if the numbers were off. When everybody thinks somebody else will step in, no one does. And the thing is, it is not about being heartless. It is about diffusion. Psychologists ran tests over and over, simulated emergencies, planted actors who needed help, and consistently, people were less likely to respond if others were around. The more people, the lower the chance that anyone would act. Even when something felt wrong, even when someone looked in pain. It was not a lack of empathy. It was a silent calculation. You start looking to others for cues. No one else is moving. So maybe it is not that serious. Maybe it is not your place. Maybe they are handling it. Maybe you will just look crazy if you jump in. This is not a glitch. This is part of the way we are wired. In groups, our instincts shift. We do not want to be wrong, or stand out, or take on a burden that was not clearly ours. So we default to inaction, hoping the collective will pick up the slack. But the collective is thinking the exact same thing. What makes the bystander effect disturbing is that it's invisible in the moment. No one ever thinks, I am choosing not to help. It just sort of happens. The freeze, the glance around, the half step that turns into hesitation, and the moment passes. And let's be honest, this does not just apply to emergencies. This is happening online, at work, in public, every day. You see someone getting piled on in the comments, and you keep scrolling. You hear something racist or sexist in a meeting, and no one calls it out. Someone collapses on the subway, and everyone just shifts a little farther away. Not because they do not care, but because they are not sure what to do, and it is easier to wait. You start thinking, who am I to get involved? What if I make it worse? What if I become the next target? What if I step up and no one follows? That fear is exactly what the bystander effect feeds on. Uncertainty, insecurity, the belief that your actions do not matter because someone else already has it covered, or should. But here is the truth. That one person who speaks up first, who moves first, who breaks the trance, they change everything. Studies show that when one person intervenes, others follow almost instantly. The crowd wakes up. The illusion of safety and silence shatters. That single decision ripples out. One action gives permission for 10 more. So the effect goes both ways. Yes, silence spreads, but so does courage. This is not about shaming people. This is about recognizing how easily we get caught in group paralysis. How much power lives in that first uncomfortable move. And how systems count on the fact that most people will stay frozen. That is how injustice survives. That is how abuse continues. That is how cruelty becomes normalized, not through monsters, but through bystanders. What makes the bystander effect so disturbing is not just that it happens. It is that it happens to you. You have been that person. So have I. And if we do not name it, we never change it. Because here is the thing nobody tells you. When you are in that moment, when you see something happening and your stomach twists, and your mind hesitates, and you glance around for someone else to go first, that is the sign. That is the moment you are supposed to move. Not because you are a hero, but because if you do not, maybe no one will. And if you think this only happens in rare, extreme situations, ask yourself how many quiet injustices go unchallenged every single day simply because no one wanted to be the first to speak. Not all social experiments are planned. Some of them are just happening around us. Every time someone needs help and no one moves, that is the experiment. Every time you feel that inner conflict and stay quiet, that is the data point. And every time you push through it, you change the outcome. Google's silent A/B testing. Have you ever opened up Google one morning and thought, something feels different? Maybe the search results look slightly cleaner, or the blue links feel a shade brighter, or you click on something and the page loads in a way that's just a little faster, a little smoother. But you cannot quite put your finger on what changed. That is not an accident. That is a test. A very quiet one. And you were in it. Google runs thousands of A/B tests every year, and you are part of them whether you know it or not. These are experiments that test two slightly different versions of something to see which one gets better results. Sometimes it is a layout. Sometimes it is font size. Sometimes it is how ads are placed or how search results are ranked. The catch is, they do not ask, they just run it on you in real time. While you are trying to find something as innocent as a cookie recipe or a phone number or the best local Thai place. And most people never notice. That is what makes it so effective. You do not need a lab or consent forms or white coats. You just need a massive stream of users who think they are using a finished product when they are actually inside a live experiment. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. These tests are not neutral. They are not just checking for usability. They are measuring behavior. Will you click here if we move this element a few pixels? Will you spend more time on the page if we rearrange the top 3 results? Can we get you to click an ad you would have ignored yesterday, just by tweaking how it looks? Every click, every hesitation, every search you abandon halfway through is data, and it feeds a system that is constantly refining how much control it can have over what you see, what you choose, what you even notice. Now, some people might say that is just optimization, that it is all about making the product better. And sometimes, that is true. But better for who? Because when Google changes how search results are ranked, even slightly, that impacts which businesses survive, which voices get heard, which facts rise to the top, and which ones get buried under sponsored results. There was a famous internal test where Google tried over 40 shades of blue for their links. 40. They wanted to know which one got more clicks, which one kept users more engaged. And they had the traffic and the tools to test it on millions of people without anyone realizing. That single test reportedly brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in additional ad revenue, all from changing the color of a link. That is how deep the rabbit hole goes. It is not about big obvious changes. It is about small invisible ones that slowly nudge your behavior. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to increase yield. And here is the thing. When tests like these are done in science or medicine, they require informed consent. Participants are told. They opt in. There are boundaries. But with tech, the platform is the lab, and you are the subject, whether you want to be or not. What does it mean when a company can run an experiment on 1 billion people at once and no one notices? What does it mean when they can shift outcomes at scale just by tweaking the layout of a page? Because these tests are not just about clicks. They are about influence. They tell the platform how to guide your decisions without ever having to force them. They learn how you respond to speed, to repetition, to visual weight, to ranking order, and they use that knowledge to keep you on track. Not your track, theirs. And here is the part nobody likes to hear. Sometimes the thing that feels most intuitive, most natural, is the result of 10 years of testing. The reason you trust that top search result, tested. The reason you ignore the right-hand column, tested. The reason autocomplete always finishes your thought exactly how you were going to write it. That is not magic. That is just millions of people before you unknowingly training the system. Silent A/B testing is not a conspiracy. It is a methodology, a core function of modern tech. But the problem is, we treat the interface like a window when it is actually a mirror. It reflects back what has been most effective at keeping people engaged. And that reflection is being updated constantly, invisibly, all around you. So the next time you use a search engine and things feel just a little off, trust that feeling. You are not imagining it. You are not being paranoid. You are just in the middle of another live experiment. And somewhere on a server, there is a data stream watching what you do next. Not because you matter, but because your behavior fits into a model. And every model needs new data. The test is not just running around you, it is running through you. The Asch conformity experiment. You probably think you know your own mind, that you can trust what you see. That if someone shows you a picture of 3 lines and asks which one is the longest, you are not gonna mess that up. It is obvious, right? You look, you answer. Done. But what if everyone else in the room gives the wrong answer first? Now you are not just answering a simple question anymore. You are questioning your own reality. You are wondering, am I missing something? Did I misunderstand? Or worse, do I want to be the only one who stands out? That exact situation played out in one of the most quietly disturbing psychological experiments ever run. It was designed by a guy named Solomon Asch in the 1950s, and it was deceptively simple. He brought people into a room and showed them a set of lines. 1 line on the left, 3 lines on the right. The task was easy. Which of the 3 lines on the right matches the one on the left? Now here is the twist. Everyone else in the room was in on the experiment except one person. That one person thought it was just a regular visual test. The others, they were actors told to give the wrong answer on purpose. And what happened? Over and over again, people gave answers they knew were wrong just to match the group. They could see the correct answer. It was right there, plain as day. But they went along with the crowd anyway. Some of them admitted afterward that they knew it was wrong, but they did not want to be the odd one out. Others started to genuinely doubt their own senses. They thought maybe they misunderstood the instructions. Maybe the others saw something they didn't. Maybe they were the problem. That is the part that sticks with you. This was not a question about politics or values or belief systems. This was about lines on a card. Facts you could literally see with your own eyes. And still, the pull of the group was stronger. You want to believe that in a room full of people saying something clearly false, you would speak up. You would trust yourself. But this experiment shows how easily we trade truth for comfort. We want to belong. We want to fit in. And that desire is so powerful it can override what we actually know is real. And here is the really uncomfortable part. This effect does not go away when the stakes get higher. If anything, it gets stronger. When we are unsure, when we feel like the outsider, when the social pressure is high, our brains default to conformity as a survival tactic. Blend in. Do not be weird. Go along to get along. And yeah, maybe that made sense thousands of years ago, when being rejected by the group could literally get you killed. But today, That same instinct shows up in boardrooms, on social media, in classrooms, in friendships. We go quiet when we disagree. We laugh at things we do not actually find funny. We nod even when something inside us is screaming, "This is not right." And sometimes we do not even notice we are doing it. We just start molding ourselves to match the energy in the room. That is the legacy of the Asch experiment. Not just that people gave the wrong answers, but that they did it in silence, with no pressure, no threats, no consequences, just the presence of others making a different choice. And if that is enough to change what we say about lines on a piece of paper, what does that mean for everything else? What does that mean for how we vote? For what we believe is true? For how we talk about injustice or stay silent about it? This is not just a psychological curiosity. This is your brain on groupthink. This is what happens when fear of standing alone outweighs the need to be honest. And the worst part, most people in the Asch experiment were relieved when the group finally gave the right answer again. You could see it on their faces, like they had been holding their breath, like they finally had permission to be themselves again. So here is the question: how often are you holding your breath, waiting for permission to say what you really think? Because the scary thing about conformity is not that it forces you to lie. It is that it makes you forget you are lying at all. We have all been there. We have all nodded when we should have questioned. We have all gone along just to keep the peace. But peace at the cost of clarity is not really peace at all. It is avoidance, and it costs you more than you realize. The Asch experiment was a mirror, a tiny moment that showed us how much of our identity is built on what the room expects. And the moment you understand that, you start to see it everywhere. So the next time you feel that tension, that quiet pressure to agree when something feels off, stop and ask yourself, am I seeing the truth or just copying the room? Because when it comes down to it, the most dangerous lies are not the ones we are told. They are the ones we start telling ourselves to stay comfortable. Social media, like buttons as dopamine experiments, it started as a harmless little icon. A thumbs up, a heart, a double tap. Something simple to show you liked something. And at first, that is all it was. A way to engage. A way to say, hey, I saw this. Cool post. Keep going. But then it became something else. A score. A signal. A reason to check your phone again. And it again. What almost no one realized in the beginning is that the like button was never just about expression. It was an experiment. A real-time behavioral test with billions of participants, and no one officially told they were in it. Here is how it works. You post something. A photo. A joke. A memory. You are feeling a little vulnerable because, deep down, you care how it is received. Then you get a like, a tiny hit of approval. And even though it is just a digital tap, your brain does something real. It releases dopamine, the same chemical involved in pleasure, reward, addiction. That hit feels good, and your brain remembers it. Next time you feel uncertain or bored or insecure, your mind tells you, hey, maybe post something, maybe check your likes, just real quick. This is not a glitch. This is by design. Social platforms figured out early that if they could trigger that dopamine response, that feel-good buzz of validation, they could keep you coming back. They could train your behavior without you realizing it. And the way they did it. Intermittent rewards. That is the trick casinos use. It is not about winning every time. It is about the chance. The maybe. That unpredictability creates obsession. If your post always got exactly 12 likes every time, you would get bored. But if sometimes it blows up and other times it flops, you start chasing the high. You start posting at certain times, using certain filters, watching your screen like it owes you something. This is not you being weak. This is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do in a system engineered to exploit it. It gets darker, because once platforms saw how much engagement these little feedback loops created, they started optimizing for them. That means showing you content that gets more likes. That means pushing you to behave in ways that get rewarded, even if those ways are fake, even if they are extreme, even if they are not really you. Ever wonder why people post clickbait captions, dramatic stories, staged vulnerability? Because the system told them that is what works. Not directly, but through a steady stream of signals. Likes, shares, saves, all pointing in one direction. Be more like this. Do what gets a reaction. And so slowly, our online selves get curated, smoothed out, polished, filtered. Because we are chasing something we never consciously agreed to chase. Approval. But here is the part most people miss. The dopamine loop does not stop at posting. It works in reverse too. You scroll, you like, you reward someone else, and your brain gets a hit from that too. A tiny feeling of connection, belonging, identity, and that creates a cycle where everyone is both the lab rat and the lever. We are rewarding each other into submission, into conformity, into a feed full of the same jokes, the same trends, the same empty encouragement dressed up as authenticity. None of this is about evil corporations twirling their mustaches. It is about metrics, time on site, daily active users. Attention is the currency, and dopamine is the engine. And once you know that, you start to see the cracks. You post something real, and it gets ignored. Suddenly you question if it was worth sharing. You post something shallow, and it pops off. Suddenly you feel tempted to do more of that, and every decision starts getting shaped by invisible incentives. This is how platforms shape identity. Not by forcing anything, just by guiding what gets rewarded, what gets seen, what gets ignored. The like button is not evil, but it is not neutral. It is a lever built to manipulate behavior, and it works so well that even the people who invented it have expressed regret. Some of them have admitted, publicly, that they underestimated the psychological cost. They thought they were building connection. What they built was a slot machine, in your pocket, disguised as self-expression, and we are the ones pulling the handle. Now here is what makes this all so hard to escape. It feels good. At least at first. That is the hook. It gives you a sense of being seen, of mattering, of being part of something. But when you step back, you start to realize you are not engaging with people. You are engaging with a loop, a system, a reward mechanism that trains you to chase responses instead of truth. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So the next time you go to post something, stop and ask yourself, am I sharing this because it matters to me? Or because I want to win the game? Because the game is rigged. The dopamine is real. The data is the experiment. And you? You are both subject and scientist now. The only question left is whether you want to keep playing. Default settings as psychological control. You ever stop to think about how much of your life is running on autopilot? Not because you are lazy, not because you are careless, but because someone else made the decision before you even knew there was a choice to make. That is the trick with defaults. They do not ask you for permission. They just quietly set the tone. And unless you go digging, unless you push back, you go along with it. When you create an account, when you download an app, when you open a new device, Everything is already set for you. Your notifications are turned on. Your location is being tracked. Your feed is curated. Your preferences, your data, even the way you interact with the world is being silently shaped. Not by you, by the defaults. And you might think, so what? It is just a setting. I can change it if I want. Sure, but will you? Most people don't, because the default feels safe, familiar, recommended. The moment you see it, your brain treats it like a suggestion from the system. And you think, well, if this is how it comes, it must be right. That is not a conscious decision. That is how our brains are wired. To reduce friction, to follow the path of least resistance. And the people designing these systems, they know that. They count on it. They know that if they set the default to collect your data, you probably won't opt out. If they default your privacy settings to public, you are more likely to share. If autoplay is on, you will probably keep watching. If notifications are on, you will come back more often. And more time means more ads, more data, more influence, all without forcing you to do anything, because you said yes without ever speaking. It is quiet control, not through rules, through design. There is a reason why every app asks you to agree to something the second you open it, and the big blue button always says accept. Not review, not customize, just accept, because someone already made the decision. Your job is just to go along with it. This is not a conspiracy. This is product design 101. And it works because it targets one of the most reliable psychological behaviors we have. Inertia. If something is already in place, we tend to leave it there. Changing it requires effort. It feels uncertain, so we avoid it, even when we know we probably should. It is the same reason most people never change their phone's default ringtone, or their cable provider, or their browser's search engine. Not because they love it, but because it is there. It is one less decision to make in a world already overloaded with choices. Now scale that up to every app, every website, every smart device. Your entire digital life becomes a set of silent agreements you never really agreed to. You are not customizing your world. You are inheriting someone else's version of it. Let's get specific. Google tracks almost everything you do by default. Your location history, your search behavior, your voice recordings. And unless you go deep into the settings and toggle things off one by one, it all stays on. Most people never touch it. Facebook used to default new users to sharing everything publicly, not because it was better for you, but because public posts generate more engagement, more clicks, more data to mine. Again, you could change it, but that meant finding the settings, understanding what they meant, making a decision, all friction. So most users, they left it alone. Now imagine a world where every small choice you make, what you read, what you click, what you share, is shaped by defaults you never reviewed. You think you are browsing freely, but you are inside a system that was designed to guide you, nudge you, trap you in patterns that benefit the platform. And it does not stop at digital stuff. Even real-world choices are influenced this way. Countries with automatic organ donor registration have dramatically higher participation rates, not because the people are more generous, but because the default is yes. You have to opt out if you do not want it. Flip that, and the numbers collapse. That is how powerful defaults are. They do not force you. They just assume. And most people follow. So the next time you open a new app or get a new update and the settings look like they already decided everything for you, ask yourself why. Who does that setting benefit? Who gains from it staying the way it is? Because if the answer is not you, then it is not neutral. It is strategic. Default settings are not just about convenience. They are about control, and not the kind that screams in your face, the kind that whispers behind your back. You think you are making choices, but really, someone already made them. All they needed was for you not to question it, so question it every time. Because once you see the pattern, you start to realize the scariest form of manipulation is not the one that forces you to say yes. It is the one that counts on you never saying no. Public school structure as a conformity experiment. Let's talk about something that feels so normal, so familiar, that most people never question it. School. Not education. Not learning. I mean the physical structure. The bells. The rows of desks. The scheduled bathroom breaks. The system itself. Because once you start looking at it not as a place to grow, but as a place to mold behavior, the whole thing starts to look less like a classroom and more like an experiment in mass conformity. From the moment you enter the system, you are taught one thing above all else: comply. Line up. Sit still. Raise your hand. Ask for permission. Obey the bell. And if you do all of that well enough for long enough, you get a sticker, a grade, a pat on the head. Do it poorly, you get detention. You get labeled difficult, disruptive, even if all you did was question something that didn't make sense. You are not just learning facts. You are learning obedience. You are being trained. Think about how early this starts. Kindergarten. You are 5 years old, and already you are expected to sit in a room for hours at a time. Be quiet unless called on. Follow a schedule that has nothing to do with your natural curiosity. You are rewarded for staying inside the lines, literally and metaphorically. Not for thinking differently. Not for asking why. And we call that socialization. We call that normal. But what if it is not just about preparing kids for the world? What if it is about preparing them to conform to a system that needs obedience more than it needs originality? You know what happens to kids who question too much? They get flagged. They get labeled as troublemakers. They get referred to counselors. Or worse, medicated. Not because they are sick, but because they do not fit the mold. Because the system is not built for thinkers. It is built for followers. And here is the thing. The structure of public school mirrors the structure of factories and offices almost exactly. Rows of people doing repetitive tasks, a supervisor watching over them, breaks at scheduled times, performance measured with numbers. Sound familiar? That is not a coincidence. That is history. Modern public school systems were designed in the age of industrialization, when the goal was to create reliable workers, not creative thinkers. People who could show up on time, follow instructions, hit targets, and never question the rules. And to be clear, that was considered a success. That was the goal. But the world changed, and the system did not. And yet we still treat it like gospel. Every kid learns the same subjects, in the same order, at the same pace. Not because that is how humans learn best, but because it is easier to manage. It is scalable. It is efficient. The student becomes a unit. The test score becomes the value. The human becomes data. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. The more compliant you are, the more praise you get. You learn that being liked means being quiet, that being successful means fitting in, that being safe means not standing out. You start to internalize it. Maybe you stop raising your hand so much. Maybe you edit your thoughts to match the teacher's. Maybe you silence your instincts because that is what gets rewarded. And by the time you graduate, you are not just walking out with a diploma. You are walking out trained, conditioned, taught to conform without even realizing it. It is subtle, but it is powerful. This is not about blaming teachers. Most of them are doing their best in a system they did not design. This is about the structure itself, the invisible architecture that shapes behavior on a mass scale. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Why do we separate kids by age and not by interest or learning style? Why do we treat sitting still for 6 hours a day as normal for a developing brain? Why is creativity treated as an extracurricular instead of the foundation? Because the system rewards sameness. It needs predictability. And anything that disrupts that gets filtered out. You might be thinking, so what? We all went through it. We turned out fine. But did we? How many adults walk around feeling like failures because they could not fit into that mold? How many creative kids were told they were lazy? How many leaders were told to sit down and shut up? And more importantly, what kind of world are we building when the first lesson every child learns is how to follow instructions? We like to talk about freedom, about innovation, about progress, but we built our society on top of a system that still trains people to ask for permission before they speak. That is not education. That is conditioning. And the most dangerous part is, once you have been through it, you start to enforce it on others. You start telling kids to behave, to fall in line, to be realistic, because that is what you were taught. And the experiment continues, generation after generation. But if school really is about preparing us for the world, maybe it is time we ask, what kind of world are we preparing kids for? One that rewards obedience, or one that needs people brave enough to think for themselves? Because right now, the structure is making that decision for us. And most people have no idea they were part of the test. Cancel culture as a mass behavior correction tool. At first, cancel culture seemed like accountability. That was the story. Someone did something wrong, the public called it out, and there were consequences. Simple, just. But then something shifted. What started as a tool for justice became a tool for control. Quiet, constant, and nearly invisible. And now it is less about what people did and more about what people fear. You feel it before you say anything. That pause, that check in your gut. Can I say this? What will people think? Will I be attacked? Will I be labeled? That is not just social pressure. That is behavior correction, and it works incredibly well because you do not need a cop. You just need the crowd. Cancel culture is not about disagreement. That would be healthy. It is about the threat of exile, public humiliation, the loss of reputation, job, friends, opportunity, all instantly. And not because of what you are doing right now, but sometimes because of what you said 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or something that gets twisted into the worst version of itself and taken out of context. What we are looking at is not accountability anymore. It is conformity enforcement. The public has become the enforcer, and the sentence is shame. There is a term for this in psychology: social sanctioning. It is what humans have always used to keep each other in line. But in small tribes it was balanced by proximity. You knew the person you were judging. You knew their story, their nuance, their growth. Now, it is one tweet, one clip, one narrative, and the whole world jumps in. You are not judged by your humanity. You are judged by your worst moment through the eyes of strangers who do not know you. And when it happens to someone else, you watch, you take note. This is what happens to people who step out of line. So you adjust. You say less. You play safe. You censor your own thoughts before anyone else has to. Not because you have changed your mind, but because you are trying to survive. That is the correction. not from within, but from fear. What makes it especially powerful is that it wears the mask of morality. People believe they are doing good, calling out injustice, holding power accountable, and sometimes they are. But the line between justice and vengeance is razor thin. And in a world addicted to outrage, it becomes less about right and wrong, and more about being on the right side of the mob. It creates a culture where silence feels safer than honesty, where questioning becomes suspicious, where the loudest people online decide the rules, and those rules change constantly, which means you are never really safe. The target can shift at any moment, and here is where it gets disturbing. This dynamic trains people to comply before conflict even happens. You start thinking like the group, even when you are alone. You start shaping your opinions based on what will not get you in trouble. And that is when the correction becomes internal. That is when the experiment is working. Because now they do not need to cancel you. You already canceled yourself. We talk about cancel culture like it is a modern issue, but the mechanics behind it have been used throughout history. In authoritarian regimes, in religious orthodoxy, in high-control social groups, the goal is always the same: eliminate dissent, manufacture unity, and make the cost of deviation unbearable. And the tool is always the same: fear of exclusion. That fear is primal. We are social animals. Being cast out used to mean death. So when people see someone being canceled, even for something trivial, it triggers something deep. Stay in line. Do not stand out. It is survival, but this is not just about social media drama. This is about how mass behavior is being engineered in real time. Because cancel culture has now bled into institutions, companies, schools, entire industries. People are losing jobs, losing platforms, losing basic access to participation, not through legal means, not through due process, but through collective emotional judgment. And once that kind of fear becomes the default setting, free thought becomes a liability. Creativity dries up, humor dies, curiosity gets twisted into risk. People start reciting what they think they are supposed to say instead of what they believe. Not because they are cowards, but because the punishment for honesty is too high. And that is when you know a correction tool has gone too far. When people are no longer learning, just complying. That is not growth. That is control. Some will say, if you did nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But that only makes sense in a system where right and wrong are stable. In cancel culture, they are not. 1 week something is acceptable. The next, it is unforgivable. The ground is always shifting, which means anyone can be next. And the worst part is, it makes people stop trusting each other. You never know who is watching, who is recording, who is waiting to call you out so they can earn some moral currency. So we isolate. We speak in code. We avoid depth. We play it safe. And the collective intelligence of society starts to drop. Because how can we grow if we are not allowed to make mistakes? How can we understand if we are not allowed to ask uncomfortable questions? How can we be human if we are only allowed to perform perfection? That is the cost of using shame as a scalpel. It does not just cut the guilty. It cuts everyone who might have had something meaningful to say, but stayed silent instead. Retail store layout psychology. You ever walk into a store just to grab one thing and come out with 10? You know exactly what you needed, but somehow your cart's full of stuff you never planned to buy. And the craziest part, you still feel like it was your choice. But it wasn't. It was a setup. A silent, psychological playbook you never saw coming. Because retail store layouts are not random. They are designed. Every aisle, every scent, every sound, even the way you walk through the space. It is all engineered to guide your behavior, and not toward what you want, toward what they want you to buy. Take the entrance, for starters. That little buffer zone, the part right after you walk in. That is called the decompression zone. Stores know your brain needs a second to adjust from the outside world, so they give you space. Not because they care, but because they know if they hit you with important stuff right away, you will miss it. Your brain literally won't register it. So instead, they put big carts there, eye-catching sales, smiling mannequins, all to ease you in, warm you up, lower your defenses. And then, almost always, they lead you to the right. Most people are right-handed, so we instinctively turn right when we enter a space. Retailers know this. That is why high-margin products, the expensive stuff they want you to grab, are usually positioned on that first right side path. You are alert, you are excited, and they hit you with the good stuff early. But that is just the start. You ever notice how the essentials are always at the back? Milk, eggs, bread, diapers, the things you actually came for. They are always tucked far away. That's not bad design. That is strategy. They want you to walk through the whole store just to get the basics. Why? Because every extra step is a chance to tempt you. A new shelf, a new display, a new impulse buy. And those impulse buys, they are not accidental either. End caps, the displays at the end of aisles, are prime real estate. Those are rented out by brands that pay for visibility. It is like a billboard with a price tag. You are more likely to grab from those because they are isolated. They feel like promotions. They feel special. But most of the time, it is just regular stuff dressed up to look urgent. Now let's talk aisle width. Ever been in a store where the aisles are just a little too narrow? That is on purpose. Narrow aisles make you feel enclosed, so you move slower, and slower movement means more browsing. More browsing means more buying. On the flip side, high-end stores make their aisles wider. They want you to feel relaxed, luxurious. You are not rushing in there. You are lingering. So they give you room to breathe, because the longer you stay, the more money you spend. And then there is scent. Yeah, they use smell to manipulate you. Bakeries pump out fresh bread smells even when nothing is baking. Clothing stores use custom fragrances to create emotional associations. A calm, clean smell in a home store makes you imagine your own home feeling that way. You do not even realize it, but your mood shifts. You trust the space more. And with that trust, you open your wallet. Sound plays a role too. Ever notice how grocery stores play slow music? That is not ambience. That is behavioral science. Slow music slows you down. You linger. You shop more. Fast music. That is for clearance sales, big box stores, places trying to create urgency. They want you in and out with your arms full. But here is the kicker. You think you are in control. You think you are the one choosing where to walk, what to look at, what to buy. But really, the layout is choosing for you. It is directing your flow, manipulating your attention, shaping your behavior with invisible cues. And the whole time, you think it is just you making decisions. That is how good the system is. Even shelf placement is a psychological game. Eye-level products are often the most profitable. That is where the brands fight to be. The stuff lower down or all the way up, usually cheaper, but less visible, less likely to sell. You are being trained without knowing it. Trained to associate location with value. And that checkout line, that little gauntlet of candy, batteries, cheap toys, last-minute stuff, that is called the impulse zone. You are trapped. You are waiting. Your brain is tired from all the micro decisions. That is when you are most vulnerable. So they hit you with low-cost, high-margin items right where you cannot miss them. Now multiply this across every store you have ever been in, every big box chain, every pharmacy, every boutique. It is not random. It is not even subtle anymore. But it works because they are not forcing you. They are nudging you. Quietly, constantly. You are part of a real-time psychological experiment every time you walk through those automatic doors. Your habits, your movement, your eye-tracking data. It is all being studied, optimized, and repackaged to make you spend just a little more. Stay just a little longer. Buy just one extra thing. And the most disturbing part, you never even noticed. You walked in for eggs. You left with $20 extra on your receipt. And the whole time, you thought you were in control. Netflix thumbnail experiments, you think you pick what to watch. But Netflix has been picking you apart for years. Not your name, not your job, not your personality. I'm talking about something way deeper. Your attention. Your instincts. The stuff you don't even notice about yourself. That's what they've been studying. And it all starts with a thumbnail, one tiny image. That's all it takes. You think you're just browsing. You think your choices are based on what looks interesting. But behind that innocent little square is one of the most advanced behavioral experiments happening on the internet. And you're in it. Every single time you open the app, Netflix doesn't just show one version of a show or movie. It creates dozens of thumbnails for the same title. Not just different styles, but completely different emotional cues. Some feature romance, others show violence. Some focus on a celebrity face, others zoom in on colors. The same show, but 100 different masks. And Netflix shows you the one it thinks you will click. And you know what? You do. You ever notice how the thumbnail for a comedy might suddenly look way darker than you expected? Or how a show you've never heard of suddenly has a face you recognize right there front and center? That's not a coincidence. That's machine learning. That's years of data about what you respond to. Not what you say you like, but what your eyes actually move toward. What you hover over, what you almost clicked. They are not trying to match your taste. They are trying to influence it. Netflix has literally admitted to swapping thumbnails based on your viewing history. If you love romance, they will push romantic-looking covers. If you lean toward action, expect explosions and fists. If you're drawn to certain faces or genders or lighting, even without knowing it, they know, and they will use it. This is not content discovery. This is behavioral manipulation dressed up as user experience. Because here is the real kicker. The content does not change. Only your perception of it does. That rom-com. It gets a dark thriller thumbnail if that's what pulls you in. That horror movie. Maybe it looks like a teen drama for you. The goal is not to tell you what the show is. It is to get you to click. And that is where it stops being about entertainment and starts being about control. Because once they know how to hook you visually, they can guide you emotionally. They can nudge your choices, steer your curiosity, even shape your mood. All without you realizing it. And all without changing a single frame of the actual show. It is like being in a lab without knowing you are the test subject. They are A/B testing everything. Every thumbnail, every description, every layout tweak. On millions of people simultaneously. You might be seeing version A while your friend sees version D. Netflix is constantly asking the algorithm one question. What makes you click faster, stay longer, and binge harder. They want you trapped in the loop. And thumbnails are just the bait. The design is deliberate. The contrast is optimized. The eyes in the photo, often placed to make direct contact with yours. They use bright colors, tight crops, facial expressions that spark emotion. If you respond better to subtlety, they will feed you moodier tones. If you chase dopamine, you will see brighter, louder, more chaotic covers. And here is where it gets personal. The system does not just learn what works in general. It learns what works on you. The more you watch, the more accurately it predicts what makes you stop scrolling. It builds a psychological profile. Quietly, privately, and without asking. You are not just watching Netflix. Netflix is watching you. And this is not some one-time thing. This is an evolving experiment. What hooked you last year might not work this year, so they adjust. The algorithm updates. Your profile shifts. You are reclassified, retested, and shown a new image, one they believe will break your resistance. And the truth is, it works. Not because you are weak, but because your brain is being gamed in ways it was never built to defend against. This is not about preference. It is about pattern recognition, emotional triggers, subconscious behavior. The stuff marketers used to dream about but never had the tools to reach. Now they do. And the question becomes, how much of what you choose is actually your choice? If the same show can be packaged as romance, thriller, comedy, or horror, depending on what gets your attention, then what are you really choosing? The story, or just the wrapper? And if they are willing to manipulate the image to get you in the door, what else are they optimizing behind the scenes? This is not just about Netflix. This is about the future of personalization as manipulation. When every platform learns how to change its face just to get you to react a certain way, you are not choosing anymore. You are being guided, conditioned. And the most dangerous part is, it feels seamless, it feels friendly. You think it is convenience. You think it is taste. But really, it is just you, playing your part in the most effective psychological experiment on attention ever created. All for a click. Grocery store sensory manipulation. You walk into the grocery store and you think you're in control. You've got your little list. Milk, bananas, maybe some bread. You're on a mission, right? In and out. Simple. But you don't realize the second those automatic doors slide open, you've stepped into one of the most carefully crafted psychological environments on the planet. You are being manipulated. Completely. With sounds, with smells, with colors, with layout. Every inch of that store is designed to push you deeper into the trance. And it starts before you even touch a shopping cart. Most stores open with flowers or fresh produce. Why? Because those items scream freshness. They light up the clean, natural, feel-good part of your brain. It sets the tone. You feel healthier just walking past. It tricks your subconscious into believing that whatever you're about to do next, even if that's stocking up on frozen pizza and soda, is still part of a healthy, balanced life. It is mood manipulation, wrapped in a bouquet of roses. Then there's the music. You think it's background noise. It's not. Grocery stores often play slow, soft music, not for ambience, but because it slows your walking speed. Slow steps mean more time in the aisles. More time means more chances to buy. The goal is to keep you calm, comfortable, drifting. But when stores want you to move quickly, like in crowded locations or late-night shifts, they switch it up, faster beats. More rhythm. They want energy then. Flow. Turnover. That's not a playlist. That's behavior engineering. Now let's talk smell. You ever walk past the bakery section and suddenly get a craving for bread you didn't even know you liked? That's not because the bread just came out of the oven. Sometimes it didn't. What you're smelling is often pumped air, artificial, intentionally released. Grocery stores learned this from casinos. Pump in the right scent, and people stay longer, feel hungrier, and spend more. The same goes for rotisserie chickens. They put those right by the entrance or near checkout because that warm, savory smell breaks down your resistance. You might not have been hungry before. Now you're starving. You tell yourself it's a quick dinner option. But what really happened is your senses got hijacked. Even color is weaponized. Bright red and yellow signs. Those are impulse colors. They trigger urgency, excitement, hunger. Sale stickers in red make the price feel more attractive, even if it's barely discounted. Green is used around natural and organic foods because it signals freshness, health, calm. Blue, almost never used in food packaging because blue suppresses appetite. That's how deep it goes. And of course, there's the layout. They bury the essentials. Milk, eggs, bread, all the stuff you came in for, is pushed to the very back of the store. That's on purpose. Because to get what you need, you're forced to pass everything you don't. And everything you don't need is arranged to catch your eye. Level shelves for premium products. End caps packed with high-margin items. Special deals in bins that look like treasure chests. You're not shopping, you're being lured. Even the cart plays a role. You ever wonder why shopping carts are so deep? That's not for convenience. That's for scale. When the bottom of your cart still looks half empty, you feel like you haven't bought that much. You feel like you still have room. That's not a design feature. That's a psychological trick to push you toward excess. And then there's sampling. You think samples are a free bonus, a kind gesture. They're not. Samples trigger the reciprocity instinct. You take a bite. Your brain says, hey, someone gave us something. We should give something back. You are literally more likely to buy that product or something nearby, not because you liked it, but because your brain is wired to return the favor. And they know it. Let's go deeper. The lighting, bright in the produce section, dimmer in wine or frozen foods. Why? Because light intensity influences buying patterns. Bright light makes fruit shine. It creates the illusion of freshness. Dimmer lighting around indulgent foods makes you feel more relaxed, less guilty, more likely to grab that extra pint of ice cream. It's not decoration, it's design. And by the time you hit checkout, your brain is tired. You've made dozens of micro decisions. And right there at the register is a wall of candy, gum, batteries, chapstick, mints, trashy magazines. That's not an accident. That's the impulse zone. It's built to catch you at your weakest. Low-dollar items, easy to grab, high markup. Last-minute dopamine before you leave. And we haven't even touched how long certain stores loop you around with no windows, no clocks. Time disappears in there. You lose your anchor. You think you've only been inside for 10 minutes, but you've been circling for 35. All of this, the music, the layout, the lighting, the smells, it's not a shopping experience. It's a behavioral funnel, designed to override your plans, to hijack your senses, to turn intention into compulsion. And the wildest part is, you leave thinking you got everything you needed. You feel good. You feel efficient. Meanwhile, you just spent twice what you planned. And you're still not sure how that bag of cookies made it in there. You didn't fail. You were played. Your senses were not informing you. They were guiding you. And the experiment worked. You were not just buying groceries. You were being nudged, tested, studied, all the way to the checkout line. Surge pricing as human desperation testing. You ever open a rideshare app, see that price, and think, wait, why is it triple the usual cost? Same distance, same time of day. But suddenly your $10 ride is now $32, and the app tells you it's just a surge, just temporary, just supply and demand. But let's be real. That is not a transportation feature. That is a human experiment. And you are in it. They are not just testing pricing. They are testing you, your patience, your urgency, your breaking point. Surge pricing sounds like a simple economic model. Fewer drivers plus higher demand equals higher cost. That's what they say. But the way it plays out is anything but neutral. Because the app is not passively reflecting demand. It is shaping it. It is pushing it. The algorithm is constantly adjusting based on how much pain you are willing to tolerate before you give in. You are not just reacting to the price. You are part of the pricing system itself. Think about the last time you were stuck. Late night, raining. You're far from home. You check the app and see that red alert. Surge in effect, but it doesn't tell you for how long. No countdown. No explanation. Just now. Higher cost. Take it or leave it. And you sit there staring, wondering, should I wait 10 minutes? Will it go down? Will it go up? Do I have a choice? That moment right there, that's the test. Because it is not just about what you are willing to pay. It is about how desperate you are, how much inconvenience you will endure, how deeply the app has locked into your behavior. And the wild thing is, the algorithm learns. Every click, every hesitation, every time you cave, it feeds the system. It refines the pattern. It builds a profile of your pain threshold. This is not about money. This is about pressure. Surge pricing turns your real life into a behavioral lab. It watches how you act when you're late for work, when it is pouring outside, when you've had too much to drink, when the buses have stopped running. It tracks the choices you make when you feel trapped, and the more you comply, the more it knows it can push. There have been internal reports, even public admissions, that surge pricing is not just a response to demand. Sometimes it is simulated. The algorithm creates artificial scarcity, a kind of digital pressure cooker. It tests whether people will bite, whether they will accept that extra 5 or 10 or 20 just to make the inconvenience stop, and most of us do, because in that moment, you are not calculating cost. You are managing stress. You are tired. You're cold. You're impatient. You are willing to trade comfort for cash, and the system rewards that. It adapts. It gets smarter. Not for your benefit, for profit. What started as a pricing model has turned into a psychological drill, one that fine-tunes its intensity based on how much resistance it gets. You know what's even darker? Sometimes the surge disappears right after you pay. You check later and the price is back to normal, almost like the pain was never real. Almost like it was just bait, a test to see if you would flinch. And it works, because the design is invisible. It feels like market forces. It feels like bad luck. It never feels like manipulation. But that is exactly what it is. This is not a market reacting to reality. This is a machine playing with your reality. And here's the messed up part. It is not just ride shares. Surge logic is creeping into everything. Food delivery, tickets, airfare, even streaming services. Companies now understand that dynamic pricing can do more than reflect demand. It can create urgency. It can manufacture scarcity. It can test how uncomfortable people are willing to get before they say yes. You are not just a customer anymore. You are a variable in a live experiment, and they keep moving the line. It starts as a little increase. Just a couple bucks, no big deal. Then you are asked to accept more. 10%, 20, 50. And because you have already caved before, the system assumes you will again. The goal is not to keep prices fair. The goal is to keep testing how far they can stretch your discomfort before you break. And you want to know something wild? People behave differently under surge pressure depending on income, age, location, even time of day. The system picks up on that too. It can shift its tactics based on what demographic is most likely to cave right now. That is not pricing. That is profiling. And it is happening every time you open the app. Every moment of frustration. Every second of hesitation. Every swipe, click, delay. It's all data. Not to help you. Not to make the service better. But to push your limits. To stretch your tolerance. To find the ceiling of what a human being will tolerate before giving up and giving in. So the next time you see that price spike, take a breath. Know that it is not just the weather, or the traffic, or the shortage of drivers. It is the machine, and it is watching, testing, learning, not if you'll pay, but when. 9 to 5 Workweek Conditioning. You probably think the 9 to 5 work week is just how life works. Standard normal. It's the adult routine. Set the alarm. Drag yourself out of bed. Cram into traffic. Sit at a desk. Count the hours until freedom. Monday through Friday. Over and over again. But what if I told you this isn't just tradition? It's not efficiency. It's conditioning. A social script written for control, not productivity. A structure designed to shape behavior, train obedience, and crush rebellion without ever needing a cage. It didn't start with your job, or your boss, or even this century. This 5-day routine. It was built during the Industrial Revolution, back when factories needed human machines, repetitive labor, predictable hours, replaceable bodies. It had nothing to do with human flourishing. It was never about your energy cycles, or your creativity, or what makes you feel alive. It was about making people predictable, containable, tired, so tired they wouldn't question anything. And it worked. Because here's the trick. It's not just the hours. It's the rhythm. The grind is built to break you down just enough to make weekends feel like a reward. You're given 2 days of pseudo-freedom, not because it's generous, but because it keeps the system running. If you had no break, you'd riot. But if you have just enough to recover, you'll crawl back in Monday morning and punch the clock like nothing happened. You ever feel that Sunday night dread, that pit in your stomach as the weekend dies? That is not natural. That is psychological conditioning. You're not born with it. It's programmed into you. Repetition, pressure, reward, repeat. It's behavioral training. And the prize at the end of each week: permission to rest. You've been taught to earn your peace. You've been taught that stillness is a luxury, that doing nothing is laziness. But let's flip that. What if the very structure that drains you is the thing keeping you from waking up? Think about it. Who benefits from a population that wakes up at the same time every day, sits in traffic at the same time, eats lunch at the same time, leaves work at the same time, watches TV at the same time, shops on the same day, sleeps at the same hour, and repeats? That's not random. That's a grid. A framework of mental submission disguised as routine. And it's so deep, we don't even question it. The moment you wake up on a weekday, your brain is already in survival mode. You're not thinking about joy or creativity. You're thinking about deadlines, meetings, commuting, just getting through the next 8 hours. The system takes your peak energy and uses it for something you didn't choose. By the time you're off the clock, your willpower is gone. That's not a flaw, that's design. Because when people are exhausted, they don't resist. They comply. Now here's the kicker. Studies have shown that most office workers are only productive for about 2 to 3 hours a day. The rest, burnout, distraction, pretending to be busy. So why the 8 hours? Why 5 days? Because the point isn't output. The point is control. Keeping bodies in motion. Keeping you on a leash. You're not just clocking in for work. You're clocking out of self-direction, and those weekend bursts of fun, they are carefully tolerated chaos. Just enough dopamine to keep you functional. Not enough to question the structure itself. Go out, drink, watch the game. Recover. Repeat. It's a loop. And breaking that loop feels almost wrong. You've been conditioned to crave structure even when it hurts you. That's how deep it goes. And don't forget, this structure bleeds into everything else: your meals, your sleep, your energy, your self-worth. People say, I had a productive day, I earned this rest. But rest should never be something you have to earn. That's a setup. That's the kind of framing that turns your entire life into a performance for someone else's benefit. Now let's talk about how early this gets drilled into us. School, the original factory for obedience. Kids wake up early, sit in rows, bells ring, lunch breaks, homework, 5 days a week. Sound familiar? That's not education. That's behavioral rehearsal. The entire system is designed to prepare you for the adult work cycle. Not for freedom, not for curiosity, for submission. You're rewarded for compliance, penalized for rebellion, and the ones who fight the structure, they get labeled disruptive, difficult, not a team player. And by the time you enter the workforce, the cage feels normal. This isn't about laziness. This isn't anti-work. People want to contribute, to build, to create. But this specific format, this rigid 9 to 5 grind, it kills the soul while pretending it's keeping you stable. It's not stable. It's stagnation. And now the system's getting smarter. Remote work, gig jobs, AI-managed schedules. You think you're free because you work from home, but your hours are still shaped. Your value still measured in units of exhaustion. The cage just looks more modern now, more polite, but the door's still locked. You didn't choose this pattern. You inherited it. And like most forms of control, it works best when it doesn't look like control at all. That's the genius of the 9 to 5. It doesn't have to chain your body. It just needs to capture your time. So next time you wake up and drag yourself through the motions, ask yourself one thing. Who taught me that this is just the way things are? See a media manipulation in the 20th century. You ever stop and wonder who decides what stories dominate the headlines? Who picks the heroes, the villains, the angles? Most people think the media just reports what happens. Like it's a mirror. Like it's neutral. But what if I told you that, for decades, some of the most trusted names in journalism weren't just reporting the news, they were shaping it, under the quiet direction of the CIA, not theory, not exaggeration. This was real, and it was massive. During the Cold War, the Central Intelligence Agency ran something called Operation Mockingbird. It wasn't just one program. It was an entire network of journalists, editors, broadcasters, foreign correspondents, all working directly or indirectly with the agency, feeding stories, spinning narratives, killing the ones they didn't want told. By the early 1950s, the CI had influence inside dozens of American news outlets, big names, national papers, radio, TV reporters on payroll. Some of them knew, some of them didn't. But the end result was the same. The public was being fed a version of reality carefully edited by the intelligence community. And the wildest part, nobody voted for it. Nobody gave permission. It was all behind the curtain. Why did they do it? Influence, perception, control. During the Cold War, the battle wasn't just nuclear weapons. It was ideas, ideology, propaganda. And to the CIA, controlling public opinion was just as important as intercepting enemy messages. So they placed assets in press rooms, gave journalists fake scoops, created disinformation campaigns to make other countries look unstable, dangerous, or in need of American intervention. All while convincing the public it was just the truth. You think of the news as this sacred space. Objective, fact-checked, independent. But the line between journalism and government blurred a long time ago. It became a two-way street. The CIA needed cover. The media needed access. So they made a deal. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. For example, some stories were planted to justify coups, to soften public opinion before foreign intervention. In countries like Iran, Chile, Guatemala, headlines were crafted to make foreign leaders look irrational, unstable, corrupt. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the CIA was already planning their removal. That's not information. That's manipulation. But it didn't stop there. Domestic reporting was shaped too. Journalists with agency ties were sometimes used to discredit dissent, to smear whistleblowers, to make activists look like radicals. Because if you control the narrative, you don't need to control the facts. You just have to shape the way people feel about them. And the agency was very good at that. When the Church Committee investigations hit in the 1970s, details started leaking. Some of it made the papers. A few brave journalists dug deeper. But most of it buried. Because exposing that kind of infiltration would destroy public trust. Not just in the CIA, but in the press itself. So the full truth stayed muddy. To this day, no one knows exactly how deep it went. The names of the outlets, the number of reporters, the extent of the collaboration. Most of it is still redacted, sealed, lost in classified files. And that's exactly how they wanted it. Here's the kicker. This wasn't just about lying. A lot of the content pushed through these media pipelines was technically true, just highly selective. Timed, framed, twisted ever so slightly to steer the narrative without anyone noticing. And that is the most effective form of propaganda. The kind that hides in plain sight. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that was the past. That was the Cold War. We're smarter now, more skeptical, right? Not really. The infrastructure for psychological influence never went away. It just evolved. It got more digital, more indirect. Think about how easy it is today to plant a story, shape an algorithm, inflate a hashtag, amplify outrage, and who's behind it. You never really know. But the fingerprints are still there. We've entered an age where the line between authentic reporting and strategic messaging is almost invisible. And if you don't question the origin of what you see, you'll assume it's real. That's the trap. That's the legacy of these early programs. People trust what they hear first. That's the rule. If a story gets out with just the right timing, tone, and coverage, it becomes the truth, even if it's planted. Even if it's fiction wrapped in just enough fact to sound legit. And once a narrative sets in, good luck undoing it. The thing is, This wasn't some rare misstep. It was systemic, widespread. The intelligence community knew that the battlefield of the mind was more powerful than any bomb. If you could steer what people believed, you didn't have to silence them. You could make them silence themselves. That's not just control. That's engineering consent. And even now, decades later, you still see echoes of it everywhere. In the headlines, in the outrage cycles, in the selective focus on some stories over others. And you have to ask, who benefits? Who decided this was news today? Who profits from the fear, the division, the spin? Because the truth is, reality is not just what happens. It's what you're told happened. And when that story is filtered through invisible hands, you're not informed. You're managed. Spotify's mood prediction algorithms. You think you're choosing your music. You open Spotify, scroll through a few playlists, pick a vibe. Chill, hype, sad, whatever. It feels personal, like you're in control. But what if it's the other way around? What if Spotify is the one choosing you? Based on how you feel, what you've done, and what it predicts you're going to do next, you are not just listening to music. You are training a machine that listens back. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every tap, every skip, every replay, it's data. And Spotify collects all of it, not just what you play, but when you play it. What time of day? What device? What location? How long you listen before skipping? Which lyrics you seem drawn to? And most importantly, your emotional state. And if you're thinking, how could it possibly know that? Let me walk you through it. Music is emotion. Every song triggers a certain feeling. Excitement, longing, defiance, nostalgia. Spotify's algorithm isn't just matching sounds. It's mapping your psyche. It looks at your patterns and says, oh, they always play this song late at night after messaging their ex. Or, they start playing aggressive tracks when they leave work. Or, they switch from lo-fi to sad piano pieces when they're alone. Now scale that across hundreds of millions of users. Suddenly, Spotify isn't just streaming music. It's creating an emotional fingerprint for every person on the platform. And it gets deeper. Spotify's AI doesn't stop at music choice. It analyzes tempo, key, valence, lyrical content. That means it knows if a song sounds happy but says something dark. It knows if the beat is calming but your reaction is anxious. It learns not just what you listen to, but how you respond. And here's where it gets really strange. Spotify filed patents to detect your mood using your voice and background noise. Not just your playlists, your actual environment, your breathing, tone, ambient sound. It wants to listen to how you sound and use that to recommend songs that match, or even influence, your current emotional state. You didn't just give the algorithm your music taste. You gave it access to your emotional thermostat. And why would a music platform care so much about how you feel? Because emotion drives behavior. If Spotify can predict your mood, it can predict your decisions. Sad people binge. Angry people act. Lonely people buy. Music becomes a lever, not just for entertainment, but for shaping consumer behavior. This is where it stops feeling innocent. Let's say Spotify knows that when you're feeling rejected, you listen to a certain genre. It then serves you ads or content that target that state. Maybe a breakup playlist. Maybe retail therapy. Maybe something that sounds comforting, but deepens the emotional spiral. That's not just mood matching. That's mood steering. And they don't even have to be malicious about it. They just need to keep you engaged. The longer you're on the app, the more data they get, the more predictable you become. and the more valuable you are, not as a person, but as a behavioral profile. Think about this. Spotify's Discover Weekly isn't just good. It's borderline psychic. It nails your taste, your vibe, your feelings, sometimes better than you could yourself. That's not magic. That's surveillance with a smile. And you're feeding it daily. You're training a system that knows when you're vulnerable before you do. That can sense a depressive episode from the type of music you play over breakfast. That can tell when you're restless, or heartbroken, or angry at the world. And it doesn't ask for permission. It just plays the next song. And sure, you might think, well, it's just music. What harm can it really do? But think about what else uses that data. Spotify partners with advertisers, with tech platforms, with emotional AI companies. This isn't just about playlists. It's about mapping human emotion at scale and selling access to that map. You're not just the listener. You're the product. And the product is your mood. We're entering an era where algorithms don't just respond to feelings. They create them. And that line between what you want to hear and what they want you to feel, it's getting thinner by the day. The scariest part is how natural it all feels. Spotify doesn't force anything. It nudges. It curates. It whispers. Here's something you might like. And most of the time you do. Because it already knows. And once that trust is built, that feeling of, hey, this app gets me, you stop questioning it. But you should. Because when a company knows how to steer your emotional state, it doesn't need to control your choices directly. It just needs to make you feel a certain way. And the rest happens on its own. So next time a song hits a little too perfectly, ask yourself, did I choose this? Or did the algorithm decide how I should feel today? The McDonald's hoax call incident. You ever wonder just how far people will go if they think someone in authority is telling them to do it? Like, what would it actually take to get an ordinary person to cross a moral line? Not in theory. In real life. Because there's one incident that pushed that question to the edge, and it happened in a fast food restaurant, a McDonald's, in small-town Kentucky. And it was one of the most disturbing real-world social experiments that no one agreed to be part of. It started with a phone call. A man claiming to be a police officer dialed the restaurant. He sounded official, confident. He told the manager that one of the young employees had stolen from a customer. Not maybe, not allegedly. He said it happened. And that she, the teenage girl working the register, needed to be detained in the office. Right away. Now most people hear this and think, come on, you wouldn't fall for that. You'd ask questions, verify, push back. But this is where it gets uncomfortable. The manager did exactly what he said. She pulled the girl into the back, isolated her, gave the phone to the fake officer, and followed every instruction he gave. Because it was coming from someone who said he was the law. Step by step, things escalated. First it was a search of her belongings, then her clothes. Then things turned deeply invasive, and it went on for hours, over the phone, all because someone with the right tone and enough pressure convinced them it was necessary. This wasn't one twisted manager acting alone. The caller manipulated multiple people. The assistant manager, the manager's fiancé, even other employees. Each person handed off the responsibility like a hot potato, not because they wanted to hurt someone, but because they trusted that authority had to be right. And that's the terrifying part. It wasn't rage or cruelty that made this happen. It was obedience. The same psychological pressure that made the Milgram experiment so famous. regular people, doing things they'd normally never consider, as long as someone else told them it was okay, or worse, required. This wasn't an isolated incident either. That same caller targeted dozens of fast food restaurants across the country. Over the span of nearly a decade, same script, same setup, same disturbing results. It wasn't just a prank, it was a psychological playbook. One that turned average people into unwitting participants in a human experiment on compliance and control. And the reason it worked? Because it felt real. The caller used specific details, names, fake badge numbers, a voice that projected calm authority, and it was happening in environments where hierarchy is everything, where employees are trained to listen, not question. Fast food chains run on structure, manager, assistant, employee. Orders come down, not up. So when that fake officer inserted himself into that chain, it was almost seamless. It didn't feel like an outside voice. It felt like just another layer of command. And that should make you pause, because if someone can hijack a system that easily, simply by sounding like someone in charge, then how many of our decisions are really ours? How many of them are just responses to pressure that we don't even recognize in the moment? The aftermath was brutal. The victim in the McDonald's case suffered trauma that can't be measured. She had trusted the adults around her to protect her. Instead, they became tools in her humiliation. And many of them walked away shocked at their own behavior, horrified by what they allowed to happen. But the damage was already done. Eventually, the man responsible was tracked down and charged. A former correctional officer, smart, calculated, and fully aware of the power dynamics he was exploiting. He didn't use force. He used suggestion, influence. He understood something most people don't want to believe, that in the right setting, you can talk people into doing almost anything, especially if you sound like you're in charge. This is not just a crime story. It's a case study in obedience, in fear, in social hierarchy, and in how our trust in authority can override our instincts, our empathy, even our common sense. Because when people are scared to question power, power can do anything. So the next time someone tells you to do something that feels wrong, pause. Ask. Push back, because blind compliance is not morality, and authority is not always right. Sometimes it's just a voice on the other end of the line, seeing how far you'll go. And if this happened in your workplace, would you recognize it? Or would you be another part of the experiment? Facebook's infinite scroll feature. You ever open Facebook just to check one notification and suddenly 30 minutes are gone? You don't even know what you looked at. You don't remember half of it. You're just scrolling, not searching, not reading. Just scrolling, and it doesn't stop, ever. There's no end point, no bottom. No moment where it says, hey, you're done, take a break. Because it was never designed for you to stop. That's not a glitch. That is the point. See, the infinite scroll feature. That endless feed that keeps refreshing itself with new posts, new stories, new bait. It's not just a UX design. It is a behavioral trap, and it is one of the most subtle, most effective psychological experiments ever deployed on the public. And you didn't even know you were part of it. Let's be real. Before infinite scroll, websites had pages. You hit the bottom, it stopped. You had to make a choice. Do I want to keep going, or am I done? That little pause was a built-in moment of awareness. It gave your brain a second to catch itself. But Facebook erased that friction. It removed the end point, so your brain never gets that cue. It never hears the signal to stop. You just keep going. Swipe, swipe, swipe. Dopamine hit, dopamine hit. One more post, one more video, one more friend's wedding, one more stranger's meltdown. Now here's where it gets dark. This wasn't some happy accident. Facebook knew exactly what it was doing. The company studied attention like it was a drug. They brought in psychologists, behavioral scientists, habit formation experts, people who understood not just what made you click, but what made you stay. And infinite scroll became the delivery system, the syringe. Because what they discovered was this: unpredictability is addicting. When you don't know what's coming next, your brain stays on high alert. It's the same mechanism that drives slot machines. Maybe the next scroll is boring. Maybe it's a hit of outrage. Maybe it's validation. Maybe it's a photo that makes you feel lonely, or seen, or both. That emotional roulette, that is what keeps you locked in. And the more you scroll, the more data Facebook collects. What you pause on, what you ignore, how fast you scroll past a video of someone crying versus someone dancing. Every single behavior feeds the algorithm, and the algorithm feeds you back. Exactly what will keep you there. This is not about connecting people anymore. This is about harvesting attention, and infinite scroll is the combine. You are not browsing Facebook. You are being studied. Every second. And the really messed up part: this feature, which seems so minor, just a little design tweak, has reshaped how people consume information, how they relate to others, how they view themselves. You don't realize how deep it's rewired you until you try to stop. Until you consciously say, "I'm done," and your thumb keeps twitching. We've trained ourselves into compulsive consumption, not because we're weak, but because the system was built to exploit our instincts. And it works. It works so well that Facebook inspired every other major platform to adopt the same thing. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube Shorts. Scroll forever, never stop, lose track of time, lose track of your own thoughts. Let the feed decide what matters. And yeah, sometimes it's harmless. Funny dog videos, memes, a nice post from your aunt. But over time, it becomes a kind of passive hypnosis. You start scrolling not because you're interested, but because your brain is begging for stimulation. You feel bored after 5 seconds of stillness. You crave noise, movement, anything. That's what infinite scroll does. It removes the space where self-awareness used to live. You don't choose to keep going. You just do. And for Facebook, that's perfect. Because the longer you scroll, the more ads you see. The more ads you see, the more they profit. It's not about helping you stay informed or connected. It's about keeping your thumb moving and your eyes glazed over. They don't need you to be happy. They just need you to be hooked. And here's the twist most people miss. The damage isn't just in wasted time. It's in the way your brain starts to expect the world to work like this. Fast, random, rewarding, always new, never still. That expectation leaks into your real life. Your attention span drops. Your patience disappears. Deep thinking feels exhausting. Sitting with discomfort feels unbearable, because your brain was conditioned by a feed that never lets you feel stillness without shame. So ask yourself, when was the last time you scrolled with intention? When was the last time you stopped mid-feed and said, "I've had enough, I'm leaving now"? Yeah, that's the point. Facebook's infinite scroll wasn't built for your benefit. It was engineered to override your stopping instinct, to turn your attention into a resource, to train your brain to chase stimulation on command. And it worked. On you, on me, on millions. So the next time you find yourself lost in that loop, remember, It's not an accident. It's a lab experiment. You're not just the user. You are the subject. Shadowbanning as behavior punishment. There's a form of punishment that doesn't feel like punishment. No one calls you out. No alert pops up. You don't get suspended, blocked, or banned. You keep posting like everything's normal. And that's what makes it so brutal. Because behind the scenes, your voice is getting buried. Your views drop off. Your likes disappear. Your audience vanishes, but no one tells you why. That's shadowbanning. And you've either experienced it or you've watched it happen to someone else. The scary part, it's not just about silencing. It's about control. Shadowbanning is subtle, and that's exactly the point. You're not removed, you're just ignored. You're still technically allowed to speak, but your microphone's been turned off, and you don't know it. It's like walking into a room full of people, talking your heart out, and realizing hours later that no one could hear you. No warning, no explanation, no appeal, just silence. And that silence starts to eat at you. You begin questioning yourself. Did I post the wrong thing? Did I trigger some algorithm? Am I just not interesting anymore? That doubt becomes the punishment. This is not some fringe tactic. It's been happening for years on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, even YouTube. You cross a line, maybe by saying something controversial, maybe by saying something completely normal at the wrong time, and instead of getting suspended, you get suppressed. Quietly, behind the scenes, your content stops reaching people, but you never get a clear answer about why. That vagueness is intentional, because if they told you the rules, you'd try to work around them. But if they just keep you guessing, you start to police yourself. This is where it turns into psychological conditioning. Platforms use attention as a form of currency. Likes, shares, comments, engagement. Those are the rewards. You post something the system likes, you get the dopamine hit. You post something it doesn't like, and suddenly you're invisible. So over time, what do? You adjust. You start watering things down. You avoid topics. You soften your opinions. Not because someone told you to, but because you're trying to avoid being ghosted by the algorithm. That's not moderation. That's behavioral control. Shadowbanning creates a system where silence becomes the enforcer, and it works because it feels like maybe you're just failing. Maybe your content isn't good anymore. So instead of getting angry at the system, you get anxious with yourself. That's the genius of it. There's no confrontation, no pushback, just quiet manipulation. You start to shrink yourself without even realizing it. And the more you second, guess what you say, the more power the system has over you. Now, some people think this only happens to people posting extreme or offensive content. But it's not that simple. It can happen because you use the wrong keywords, or because your post gets flagged by an overactive moderation filter, or because someone mass reports you for no reason, or because your content doesn't keep people engaged long enough. And sometimes it happens for no obvious reason at all, which is exactly what makes it so effective. The uncertainty forces you into submission. You don't know what's allowed, so you just stay quiet. And here's the part people don't want to admit. This isn't about safety. It's about control. Platforms want you to post, but only in ways that make them money, keep advertisers happy, or maintain their version of order. They still want your content. They still want your time. They still want your data. They just don't want your voice if it challenges the wrong thing. So they don't delete you. They just turn down your volume until no one hears it. Shadowbanning turns speech into a gamble. Every post feels like a test. Will this one get through? Will this one tank my reach again? You're constantly second, guessing yourself, constantly adjusting, constantly chasing a version of yourself that's safe enough to be seen, but real enough to still feel like you. That tension becomes exhausting, and that's the cost of this kind of invisible punishment. It turns creators into people, pleasers, thinkers into marketers, and communities into echo chambers. There are people right now who have thousands of followers but no engagement. Not because their audience left, but because the platform decided they were no longer favorable. And instead of explaining why, the platform just lets them fade out. No closure, no clarity, just a slow disappearance. And you know what happens when people start disappearing like that. The others start watching their step. They start toning things down. Not because they're afraid of being banned, but because they're afraid of being shadow banned. They're afraid of the silence. And that fear becomes the leash. That fear is what keeps people in line. So the next time your post stops showing up, or your views crash without warning, or your account just starts to feel strangely invisible, ask yourself, are you being ignored, or are you being managed? Is this just a quiet punishment meant to reshape your behavior without having to confront you? Because if the algorithm can't control what you say, it will control who gets to hear it. And most people don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. A and B tested news headlines. You probably think you choose what news you read, that the stories you click on are a result of your interests, your values, your curiosity. But what if I told you that the news you see, the way it's written, the angle it's pitched, isn't just a reflection of reality? It's a result of testing. Cold, data-driven testing. Because behind nearly every headline you've ever clicked on, there were 2 or 3 other versions you never saw. Different wordings, different levels of emotion, different triggers, and whichever version made the most people stop scrolling won. Welcome to the world of A and B tested news headlines. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's marketing science applied to journalism. Major outlets like CNN, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, Vox, even your local paper if it's online, they run experiments constantly. They test headlines like ad agencies test slogans. They write multiple versions of the same story title, show different versions to different readers, and whichever one gets the most clicks becomes the new reality. Not the truest one, not the most responsible one, the most clickable one. Let that sink in. Before the truth even hits your screen, it's passed through a filter of performance metrics. That means outrage beats accuracy. Fear beats nuance. Anger beats balance. Because those emotions drive the most clicks. And it works. Headlines with emotional buzzwords get significantly higher engagement. Add a little panic, a little blame, a little tribal identity, and you've got a winner. But this doesn't just affect how we consume news. It changes how we think. Because if every headline is optimized for emotional reaction instead of honest understanding, what does that do to our worldview? It makes us addicted to the feeling of knowing, of being right, of being scared. It's not about informing anymore. It's about stimulating. The article could be balanced. It could have facts, research, quotes from both sides. But the headline, that's not designed to tell the truth. It's designed to bait you, to get you mad, curious, defensive, or smug. And here's the twist. It doesn't even have to match the story. You've seen it. A headline that screams crisis or conflict, only to find out the actual story is way more mild. That's not an accident. That's optimization. And once a certain kind of headline works, once it becomes the proven emotional trigger, it spreads across outlets, across platforms. Suddenly, everyone's using the same playbook. News becomes more about engagement loops than journalism. Every story gets weaponized for performance. And the craziest part, you were part of the experiment. You didn't consent. You didn't sign up to be in a study. But you were. Your click helped decide which version of the world got published. You helped teach the algorithm what kind of fear or rage gets the most attention. This isn't limited to politics or big world events either. It happens with science news, health updates, tech stories, even celebrity gossip. Every article becomes a test of emotional manipulation. Which title makes people panic about a virus? Which framing makes a tech innovation sound like a threat? Which celebrity scandal gets more clicks when the headline hints at betrayal instead of just reporting facts? And yes, there's a business side to this. More clicks equal more ad revenue. That part's obvious, but it's deeper than money. It's about control over perception. If headlines are the way most people engage with the news, and let's be honest, a lot of people never even read the article, then shaping the headline is like shaping the lens through which we see the world. And if that lens is being engineered for maximum emotion, it means we're walking around with a constantly distorted version of reality in our heads. Everything feels more urgent, more divided, more hopeless. And the A-B test makes it worse over time, because it doesn't stop once they find a winning headline. It becomes the new baseline. Then they test again, and again, slowly turning up the emotional temperature until everything is a crisis. Everything is extreme. Everything is life or death. Even if it's not, even if the actual facts are way more nuanced. But nuance doesn't win in A-B testing. It never does. Fear wins. Drama wins. Outrage wins. Now think about how that affects your day-to-day life. You wake up, scroll your feed, and see headlines that were literally engineered to manipulate your emotions before you even had your coffee. You're not just reacting to the world. You're reacting to the version of it that tested best at making people anxious or angry. And once you're emotionally triggered, your brain stops questioning the source. It just responds. It shares. It argues. It spirals. And meanwhile, the platforms and publishers collect the data and run the next test. So now we're stuck in this loop, where the news isn't just reporting what happened. It's constantly experimenting with how to frame it in a way that gets the strongest emotional pull. And we, the audience, are the test subjects. Every click, every share, every scroll feeds back into the system, teaching it how to better hijack our attention next time. So the next time you see a headline that instantly makes you feel furious or terrified or completely validated, stop for a second. Ask yourself, am I reacting to the news? Or am I reacting to the version of it that was designed to manipulate me? Because in this system, the truth is just one version of the headline. And it's not always the one that wins. Mass surveillance normalization. You ever notice how quickly we got used to being watched? Like, one day, surveillance was this dystopian sci-fi fear, and the next, it was just part of everyday life. Cameras on every corner, location tracking in your phone, microphones in your home devices, and no one really bats an eye. What used to spark outrage now gets brushed off with a shrug. That's not by accident. That is mass surveillance normalization. And you were part of it. We all were. At first, it came in with a mask of safety. Airports after 9/11, security cameras in public spaces. Everyone agreed because fear made it feel necessary. Then came the phones. You had to opt in to GPS so your weather app worked. You gave access to your microphone so voice commands could help you multitask. And it felt convenient, harmless. But what started as safety turned into routine, and what was once an invasion became a feature. Then it got subtle. Apps started asking for permissions without really telling you why. Your photos, your contacts, your messages. Platforms started tracking your behavior, logging every tap, every scroll, every pause. Not just what you post, but what you watch. How long you watch. Whether you hesitated before clicking. It's all part of a growing, invisible profile about who you are, what you want, what you fear. And here's the part people miss. You didn't agree to all of it. You were slowly eased into it. That's how normalization works. You do not need force when you have comfort. And it's not just governments anymore. It's corporations, tech giants, data brokers. They know more about your behavior than your closest friends. Where you were last Tuesday. What time you usually eat. Who you message at night. What you're most likely to buy when you're stressed. They don't need to hack your brain. They just collect your patterns until they can predict your next move. And the more accurate they get, the more power they have. Now, you might be thinking, who cares if they know I like iced coffee and doom scroll late at night? But it's not about the single data points. It's about the patterns. The accumulation. Imagine every piece of your behavior stitched into a digital mirror version of you. That mirror self is what advertisers, governments, and platforms are interacting with. Not the real you. The predicted you, and in some cases, the manipulated you. And the scary part, they convinced you this was all normal. They gave you rewards for compliance. Tag your location and get more engagement. Turn on microphone access and get smarter recommendations. Accept cookies and unlock full site features. So you did, and every time you clicked yes, the system learned something else about how to get you to say yes again. That's not privacy erosion. That's conditioning. And every now and then, someone blows the whistle. We get leaks, revelations, stories about mass data collection, government surveillance programs, companies selling your personal info. And we're shocked for maybe a day or two. Then it fades. Not because it's not horrifying, but because it's already embedded into our normal. We've been numbed by the constant drip of intrusion. Think about how strange it is that we are more afraid of being ignored online than being watched. We care more about visibility than privacy. We trade off safety for convenience without asking what that safety actually costs. And over time, the idea of being surveilled became a background noise. You know it's there, but you stopped reacting to it. That's what they wanted. Even kids growing up today are used to the idea that everything is trackable. Parents share baby pictures before kids can even speak. Teenagers grow up with facial recognition at school and location sharing with their friends. Privacy is no longer something you lose. It's something you never get to have in the first place. That's not just sad. That's dangerous. Because when people don't expect privacy, they don't demand it. And when you don't demand it, you don't notice when it's taken away completely. And don't get it twisted. This isn't just about ads or recommendations. Mass surveillance means predictive policing, algorithmic bias, censorship, social credit systems, behavioral scores. It means your online behavior could influence your job opportunities, your insurance rates, your ability to travel, your access to services. and it's already happening in places you would not expect. Slowly, quietly, one policy update at a time. And the worst part, if you speak up about it, you're the one who seems paranoid. That's how deep the normalization goes. They made surveillance feel like security. They made it feel like progress. And they made people feel like they had nothing to hide, so they shouldn't care. But that logic falls apart fast. You may have nothing to hide today. But what about tomorrow? What about when the definition of suspicious behavior changes? What about when laws shift? What about when silence itself becomes a red flag? Mass surveillance was never just about safety. It was about power. And the more comfortable we became with it, the easier we made their job. Because now, you don't need to be forced into obedience. You're watched into submission. And the terrifying thing is, you barely even noticed it happening. Limited time offers as urgency traps. You know that little clock ticking down on a product page. That warning that says only 3 left at this price. Or that sudden email blast about a sale ending at midnight. Yeah, that is not there to help you save money. It is there to trap you, to make you act before you think, to hijack your sense of time and twist your psychology into making a decision you probably would not make if you had just 1 more hour to think about it. That is not urgency. That is manufactured panic. And you are not just the target of it. You are the experiment. Limited time offers are not new. Marketers have used urgency to sell things for decades. But what is different now is how precision engineered it has become. Algorithms track your behavior. Platforms know how long you hesitated last time. They remember when you almost checked out but didn't, and now they test which kind of urgency hits you hardest. Is it a countdown timer, a flash sale, a fake scarcity warning? You are not just buying a product. You are reacting to psychological bait that was tested on thousands of people before it ever got to you. And let's be real, it works. Your brain sees a deadline and it kicks into survival mode. The logical part of your mind shuts down, and the emotional part takes over. Because loss feels worse than gain. That is called loss aversion. You might not be sure if you want the thing, but the idea of missing out on the discount, that triggers anxiety. The thought that someone else might grab the last one before you. That flips on your competitive instincts. It is not about the value of the item anymore. It is about avoiding the pain of regret. And here is the kicker. Most of the time, that urgency is fake. Completely fabricated. There are not only 3 items left. The sale is not really ending at midnight. They will run it again next week. The entire setup is a lie designed to feel true. Because it only has to feel urgent. It does not have to actually be urgent, and they get away with it because everyone does it. Airlines, retailers, subscription platforms, even nonprofits. The same tactics used to make you panic buy shoes are being used to push political donations. And every time you fall for it, even just once, they learn more about how to make you fall for it again. They A/B test the colors of the timer. They test whether it says sale ends in 2 hours versus sale ends in 1 hour. They even test how fast the countdown moves. It is not just a marketing strategy. It is behavioral conditioning. It turns you into a reactive consumer instead of a conscious one. Now you might think, so what? I got a deal. I saved $20. But ask yourself, did you buy something you truly needed? Or did you buy it because you were afraid not to? That is the trap. Urgency overrides intention. And in a world where everything is always on sale for just a little while, you never get the chance to pause and ask if it matters. And the more we normalize this kind of manipulation, the more it bleeds into every part of our lives. Think about it. Limited time enrollment for this online course. Only a few spots left in this community. Book now or lose your chance. Even relationships are getting urgency coded. Apps say someone just liked you. Act fast. FOMO is now a default setting. Scarcity has become a script. And the worst part is it creates emotional clutter. That low-key anxiety of always feeling like you are missing out. That pressure to keep up, to respond fast, to decide faster. It burns people out. It trains us to live reactively. It chips away at patience, at discernment, at trust, because when everything is urgent, nothing feels real. Every headline becomes a rush. Every product becomes a must-have. Every moment becomes a deadline. And here is where it gets really uncomfortable. The urgency trap does not stop at shopping. It is used in politics, in media, in news, breaking alerts, time-sensitive petitions, crisis emails. Everything is now a 5-alarm fire. Not because it always is, but because people do not click unless it feels that way. And once you're inside that loop, you start operating on adrenaline. You are not thinking critically. You are scanning for exits, for relief. And the relief they offer is to buy something, sign something, share something, react now, regret later. Limited time offers sound like opportunity, but they are often exploitation wrapped in a clock. They take advantage of your biology, your wiring, your good intentions. And the more we accept them as normal, the easier it is for those in power, whether they are selling products or ideologies, to push us into choices that benefit them, not us. So next time you see that timer ticking down, next time a website tells you there are only 2 left, or that the offer ends in 6 minutes, pause. Ask yourself, would I want this if it were still available tomorrow? Or am I being pushed into a decision I did not come to on my own? Because urgency should come from within, not from a countdown clock blinking in red. Universal Basic Income Pilot Behavior Studies. You ever wonder what people would do if they just got money? No catch, no job required, no hoops to jump through, just a steady check every month, whether you're rich or broke, employed or not. That's Universal Basic Income, or UBI. And for years, governments and researchers have been quietly testing it on real people. But these tests weren't just about economics. They were behavior studies, psychological experiments. And most of the people in them didn't even realize they were being watched that closely. It sounds simple on the surface. Give people money. See what happens. But that's not what these pilots were really about. They weren't just handing out checks to be generous. They were trying to figure out what kind of person you become when you remove survival pressure. Do you work harder? Do you slack off? Do you get healthier, happier, more creative? Or do you spiral? Do you become dependent, unmotivated, maybe even self-destructive? Every UBI pilot has its own design. In Finland, they gave unemployed people a flat monthly amount with no strings attached. In Stockton, California, they picked a random group and gave them $500 a month for 2 years. Other studies happened in Kenya, Namibia, even in parts of Canada. And in almost every case, they weren't just tracking what people did with the money. They were tracking what changed inside of them. Did people start businesses? Did they go back to school? Did they spend more time with family, or did they spend it all in the first week and then fall back into debt? These pilots were designed to watch decision-making under pressure, or the lack of it. And in many ways, that's the most disturbing part. Because when you strip away the stress of survival, you start to see what people really value, what they're drawn to, what they've been too exhausted to even think about. And here's what shocked the researchers. Most people didn't get lazy. They got bold. They took risks they had never dared to take before. They quit toxic jobs. They started side hustles. They volunteered. Mental health improved. Anxiety dropped. Parents spent more time with their kids. People had space to think, to breathe, to choose. And that scared some people. Because the idea that money is the only thing keeping society from collapsing. That narrative got weaker. But not everyone reacted the same. Some people panicked. They didn't trust the system. They thought the payments would disappear. They hoarded, or froze, or felt guilt they couldn't explain. Because when you've spent your whole life tying your worth to your work, free money feels wrong. It feels like cheating. And the experiment isn't just about who thrives under UBI. It's about who can even accept it without self-sabotaging. And let's be clear. These studies weren't charity. They were data goldmines. Every purchase, every skipped shift, every therapy session, every new habit. It was all recorded, analyzed, compared. Not just to see if UBI is affordable, but to see how predictable we are. Could money itself be used as a lever? Could it be optimized, delivered in ways that control outcomes? In some cases, payments were tweaked. Different amounts, different frequencies. Some monthly, some weekly, some one-time lumps. They wanted to see what made people spend more rationally, what made them feel more secure, what made them more compliant. Because UBI is not just a policy. It is a psychological trigger, a tool that can reshape how people see themselves. And that kind of tool, in the wrong hands, it is not uplifting. It is weaponized. There's this idea that people are lazy by nature, that if you give them something for free, they'll sit on the couch and rot. That myth has been used for centuries to justify suffering. But UBI pilots are flipping that script. They're showing that sometimes people are not lazy. They're just trapped. Trapped in low-wage jobs. Trapped by stress. Trapped by never having enough mental space to think more than a week ahead. And once you remove that pressure, something wild happens. People start acting human again. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because these pilots, they're temporary. That's what makes them experiments. They end. And when they do, people don't just lose income. They lose momentum. Habits collapse. Optimism dies. It's like waking someone up with a breath of hope and then slamming the door shut again. And watching what happens next. That's part of the data too. And not every result was rosy. Some people overestimated what they could handle. Some made reckless decisions. Some fell apart once the structure of stress was gone. Because when you're used to living in crisis mode, calm can be unfamiliar, even terrifying. And that reaction, that's part of the study too. They want to know who breaks when the pressure lifts, who flourishes, who freezes, who needs structure, who needs freedom, who can't function without fear. These studies may look like social progress, but make no mistake, they're also control tests, simulations of what could happen if power dynamics were tweaked, not eliminated, just adjusted. And behind every heartwarming headline about a mother finally affording diapers, there's a spreadsheet filled with behavioral data. This is not just about economics, it's about conditioning. Because if you can figure out how people behave when given security, you can also figure out how to design that security in a way that steers behavior, that shapes society without force, that nudges people into roles, routines, even ideologies, without them realizing they're being shaped. Universal basic income sounds like freedom. But these pilots are also measuring how free we really are when the survival game ends. Public mask behavior during COVID. It was never just about the mask. That little square of fabric became something way bigger than a health precaution. It became a signal, a line in the sand, a loyalty badge. And the second it left the realm of science and entered the arena of human behavior, everything changed. What we witnessed during COVID wasn't just a global health crisis. It was one of the largest unintentional social experiments in modern history. And the lab was your neighborhood grocery store. See, when people were first told to wear masks, there was confusion, fear, skepticism. It was a foreign behavior for most people in the West, something associated with hospitals or faraway countries. But overnight, it was mandatory. And here's where it got interesting. The point of a mask is simple: reduce the spread, protect others. But quickly, wearing one stopped being about health and started being about identity. And you saw it. One person walks into a store wearing a mask, and another without one looks at them like they're overreacting, or like they're brainwashed. And the masked person looks back like the other is selfish, dangerous. It stopped being about particles in the air. It became a social mirror. How do you see yourself? How do you want others to see you? And in that way, masks revealed something deeper than infection rates. They revealed how tribal we've become. What started as a shared precaution splintered into performance. For some, wearing a mask was a symbol of responsibility, of solidarity. For others, it was an invasion, a threat to autonomy, and these weren't random reactions. This was psychology in motion. Masks turned into visual cues that sparked instant emotional responses: trust, fear, judgment, defiance. You could tell how someone felt about the world in a split second, just by what was or wasn't on their face. Behavioral scientists watched it unfold in real time. How mask mandates were enforced told us how authority is respected or resisted. How people complied in certain neighborhoods, but not others, showed the cracks in cultural cohesion. Some wore it below the nose, not because it was comfortable, but as a form of silent protest. Others doubled up, not because they were told to, but because it gave them a sense of control in a chaotic world. Every adjustment, every refusal, every compliance, it was all data, and it didn't stop there. People started modifying masks. Fashion brands jumped in. Designers, slogans, colors. They became personalized. And suddenly, something designed to anonymize you started saying everything about you. You were careful, or you were angry, or you were scared, or you were skeptical. People even made statements by taking them off the second they stepped outside. Not for comfort, but as a public declaration. It went deeper than we realized. Psychologically, masks interfered with facial recognition, not just by machines, but by each other. We lost micro-expressions. We had to rely on the eyes, on body language. And that lack of facial feedback, it made people more distant, less emotionally attuned. Studies showed people were less likely to start conversations, less likely to smile, less likely to empathize in public spaces. And that's no small thing. That shift in social behavior had ripple effects. But what no one expected was how masks became moral litmus tests. If you wore one, some assumed you were compliant, afraid, obedient. If you didn't, others assumed you were selfish, reckless, conspiratorial. It split families, friendships, entire communities. It became the new scarlet letter, depending on who you asked, and it didn't matter that the science changed or that the rules evolved. Because by then, it wasn't about health anymore. It was about values, and values don't shift as easily as guidelines do. Governments and media didn't help. Constant mixed messaging turned public health into public theater. One week it was mandatory, the next it was optional. Some leaders wore masks only in certain settings, others mocked them entirely. And that inconsistency, it eroded trust, made people feel like they were being manipulated, and maybe they were, because every new rule gave institutions more behavioral data. Who followed? Who pushed back? Who could be nudged? Who had to be threatened? And when you zoom out, it's clear. The mask wasn't just a barrier for viruses. It was a filter for human behavior. It showed us who we listen to, who we fear, who we trust. It highlighted the cracks in our social contracts, the inconsistencies in how we treat science, and the deep, emotional role of visible signals in group identity. And maybe the scariest part, once the mandates ended, the psychology didn't. There's still a lingering tension when you see someone masked in a crowd, or someone cough without covering their mouth. There's a flash of memory, of division, of that time we were all part of a live experiment and didn't fully know it. And maybe we still are, because if something as small and practical as a face covering can be turned into a tool for tribalism, obedience, rebellion, and judgment, what else already has?